Daniel, il ne faut pas qu'il reste là, je lui ai dit tout à l'heure.
Il est où?
Il est là, il fait des photos. C'est le psychologue. Le psychologue. Alex.
Non, pas de problème.
Ensuite, comment vous voulez vous positionner pour rentrer?
Bah écoutez, est-ce qu'il y a une photo de famille?
Oui.
Ça prend 2 secondes et ensuite ils vont dans la salle, c'est ça?
Et ensuite on descend dans la salle, oui.
Bah si j'ai le temps de faire la photo et de descendre...
Ok,
bah,
donc vous suivez vous en fait.
Ouais.
Ok, très bien. Parce que la canne de poule, elle va être à l'intérieur, elle va précéder et vous à l'inverse, vous suivez.
Oui.
Ok, très bien, ça marche.
Parce que je suis chargé, alors les précéder, c'est un peu dangereux.
Ok.
Je suis tout seul avec tout ça.
Non, mais allez-y.
Hi, this is Thierry again from the OECD. Hi. Macron is supposed to arrive in 5 minutes. I will do the arrival and I will try to go inside after him then to do the photo op. So after the photo op, it will be finished. I will have to rush down to the speeches room. So when we saw that, if you saw that the photo op is about to finish, that it's about to start. Okay. Okay, thank you.
On marche jusqu'ici, on prendra des petites photos de ce côté.
No, I will try to follow up with like you and the photo up right after. Okay. Thank you.
Très bien.
Ils arrivent.
Ok.
Heureux d'être là.
On est très très honorés.
Tu vas bien, toi?
On essaye de tenir le cap ici. Si vous voulez, Monsieur le Président, petite photo ici avec s'il vous plaît. Et ici, on a un groupe de vos amis qui sont déjà ici. Aubry. Ici, il y a deux, trois, Gabriel Ramos, que vous connaissez très bien, toujours la volée, l'UNESCO, le pays la volée.
Okay, back over this side.
Reculez tous.
No, back over. We're doing the photo here.
Alors, monsieur le Président, la photo est là. Photo ici, avec vous. Sans doute,
Okay, thank you very much. If you would like to receive this one first, please. Thank you.
Ah, ici.
Thank you.
A very warm welcome, everyone, to those here in person at the OECD and to all those joining our live broadcast today from around the world. My name is Axel Threlfall. I'm the editor-at-large at Reuters, and I will be your host and your moderator over the next few hours. Today's event marks the commemoration of the 60th anniversary of the signing of the OECD Convention, just a stone's throw from where we're sitting now, on the 14th of December, 1960. Today we pay tribute to the history of an organization whose roots lie in the Marshall Plan and post-war reconstruction. But importantly, today is also about our present and our future. The COVID crisis, the recovery, the priorities for building back better, the challenges and opportunities facing multilateralism, and the role the OECD plays in all of the above. We have a really busy and a very compelling agenda ahead. As I mentioned, this is a live event being broadcast from the OECD headquarters in Paris. There is an impressive number of leaders with us here in person, testament to the significance and indeed the importance of today's event. We will also be joined virtually, but still live, by leaders from several other OECD member countries, and others have sent video messages to mark this occasion that will be played out during proceedings. We have 3 leaders' panel discussions lined up for you, an opportunity to really dig, I think, a little deeper into some of the issues on the table. And as we all know, there are plenty of big, critical issues that we need to discuss. This is being billed as a leaders event, but many other voices will be heard in a number of different sessions this week, as well as through social media and the OECD website. Okay, enough from me for the time being. To kick off this event, I'd like to introduce a short commemorative video compiled by the OECD that details some of the milestones of the past 60 years.
The OECD is marking its 60th anniversary in uncertain and troubled times. The COVID-19 pandemic changed our world in 2020 and poses a challenge for us all as we try to save lives, jobs, and our communities. The OECD itself emerged from a crisis, and we have overcome others. We know from experience that we will get through this one. The Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development was created 60 years ago to bring countries together to promote the economic and social well-being of their peoples and spread the promise of cooperation and development throughout the world. Our countries reached out to each other for trade and investment, to learn from one another and share ideas and best practices. The OECD forged groundbreaking standards to raise the bar and level the playing field, to enable our countries to advance together. We urged reforms, established the Anti-Bribery Convention, guidelines for multinational businesses, norms for financial support and development assistance, and a polluter pays principle before anyone knew our climate was changing. We were ahead of the curve on the digital economy too, issuing guidelines to protect personal data before the internet age. Our joint efforts brought stability and prosperity and drew our world closer together. The OECD went global, welcoming in new members and worked alongside many countries. We entered the new millennium feeling buoyant, connected and confident. But then came the 2008 crisis. The collapse of financial markets shook our world. Globalization had benefited the lucky few. Working people, from the lowest earners to the squeezed middle class, felt betrayed and left out. Change was needed. We took a long, hard look at ourselves and charted a bold new course. With our member countries, our partners, business and labor leaders, international organizations, and our increasingly diverse stakeholder community, into a decade of transformation to forge better policies for better lives and a stronger, cleaner, fairer world. We widened our membership and built stronger links with the G7, G20, APEC, and the United Nations. And we listen to people, constantly through our OECD forum and our burgeoning media and interactive platforms. We examined what really matters in people's lives and reconnected with our founding mission by going beyond GDP and to put people's well-being at the center. We launched new approaches to economic challenges to challenge our thinking and make policies more resilient and agile. Thanks to our inclusive growth initiative, we sought to bridge divides, focusing on inequalities in wealth and opportunity, the gender gap, and protecting the most vulnerable. We stepped up our fight against tax havens and left nowhere to hide by ending bank secrecy and exposing 84 million offshore accounts worth 10 trillion euros. We took unprecedented steps to ensure multinationals pay their fair share of taxes wherever they do business and supported revenue authorities in developing countries. We promoted responsible business conduct within companies and along their supply chains. And we urged our countries to go green, building on half a century of environmental work to support the Paris Agreement to safeguard our climate and our biodiversity, our planet and the future of our children. To improve education, we took the bedrock of our PISA tests and updated them for teachers and adults in a digital age. Our Going Digital strategy kept us ahead of the technological wave as we addressed the likes of blockchain, forged new principles on artificial intelligence, and laid the ground for the future of work. We transformed to respond to the world's most pressing challenges by integrating our economic, social, and environmental work, pioneering new initiatives on climate, housing, sustainable infrastructure, and making the OECD more impactful. A do tank in tune with the needs of member countries and the global community. Still, COVID-19 caught us off guard, but not off our game. We responded as we've always done, steadying the ship and shifting into gear with timely data and analysis on our coronavirus hub as part of a massive global response to help countries navigate through the crisis and prepare for the future. The pandemic has amplified other critical global challenges we've long faced and has made addressing them more urgent than ever. The crisis has brought us to a moment of truth. No country can address these global challenges alone. Only by acting together, multilaterally, can we overcome them and build our world back better. The OECD, working together, recovering together, imagining together, daring together. That's what we do. That's what we can be proud of and commemorate together.
Président Macron, Président Sanchez, Président Michel, Directrice générale Azoulay, et distingués invités, c'est avec un immense plaisir que je vous accueille aujourd'hui pour cette commémoration du 60e anniversaire de la signature de la Convention de l'OCDE. L'OCDE trouve ses origines dans le plan de Marshall, cette démonstration brillante que les économies sont liées entre elles et que nous avons un intérêt commun à la prospérité de tous. Ce plan donna naissance à l'Organisation européenne de coopération économique, la OECE, en 1948, et puis à l'OCDE, son successeur, en 1960, représentant une réponse collective à la période de non-coopération des années 1920 et 1930, et qui avait conduit à la Grande Dépression, aux conflits commerciaux et finalement à la guerre. The OECD was part of a broader effort to entrench a rules-based international order to promote global economic development and improve the well-being of people everywhere. Now, 60 years later, these aspirations still deserve to be celebrated and reaffirmed. During the intervening period, the OECD has established itself as a reference for objective analysis, the sharing of best practices, the production of reliable data, and recommendations for public policies. Remember, our motto is better policies for better lives. This OECD was often ahead of its time. Already in 1971, it established its Environment Directorate. It was actually the first international organization to have an Environment Directorate. Published the first Migration Outlook. Now, that was 44 years ago, and we have been doing that year in and year out. Launched PISA in the year 2000, which became the world's reference for education systems, and warned about inequalities. I remember in 2008, our report, Growing Unequal, with a question mark. Unfortunately, then we had to remove the question mark because we confirmed that we were growing unequal. Now, we celebrated these and other achievements at the 50th anniversary in 2011. But in the 10 years since then, the OECD has continued to advance, continued to evolve, even faster than ever. We've been guided by 5 main objectives. First, we have put people at the center of policymaking. From our inclusive growth, our green growth, our gender initiatives, the creation of the OECD Center for Well-being, Inclusion, Sustainability, and Equal Opportunities, which we call WISE, the WISE Center. The Better Life Index, green growth indicators. In every case, the OECD has led the way in linking policies to the key objective of people's well-being. Second, we have evolved from a think tank to a do tank, helping government design and implement, as I mentioned before, better policies for better lives. Third, we work hard to update and improve our analytical frameworks. The New Approaches to Economic Challenges initiative, otherwise known as NIAC, which grew out of our collective failure to anticipate the global financial crisis in 2008. This NIAC initiative has improved our understanding of systemic risks and has provided us with better indicators for resilience. A fourth key priority has been to develop and strengthen the OECD's standards and to broaden countries' adherence to the standards. It's not enough just to have the standards, then you have to make them stick. The OECD has developed more than 450 legal instruments, many of which have been updated and upgraded and modified. Key recent examples include the OECD Principles on Artificial Intelligence, adopted last year, which were then, by the way, adopted by the G20. So they are the, I suppose, I put the OECD first, no surprise, so OECD G20 Principles on Artificial Intelligence. Then the 2018 multilateral convention to implement tax treaty-related measures to prevent what we call the base erosion in profit shifting, the BEPS. We've also worked relentlessly to increase the global reach of the organization. Since 2010, 7 new members have joined, and Costa Rica will soon follow. It'll be the 8th. And 6 countries, Argentina, Brazil, Bulgaria, Croatia, Peru, Romania, they have been waiting almost 4 years for an answer on their request for membership. And by the way, let me use the opportunity of having our leaders here to say to them, we obviously have to give these countries an answer and start them on the process of membership. It takes, after all, 4 to 5 years on average to become a member. Now, we've also identified our engagement with non-members through our work with key partners, our country programs, our regional programs, and the work of what we call our development cluster. We've also, since 2008, intensified our collaboration with the G20 and the G7 and have advanced major international initiatives like the drive for global tax transparency, the 25 by 25 gender target, and the G20 OECD principles on corporate governance. Now, this progress has been put to the test in the current crisis. And I'm pleased to say that the OECD delivered. The OECD delivered. We have mobilized our multidisciplinary expertise, bolstered the coordination efforts to help governments limit the impact of the crisis on people, better anticipate uncertain futures, and raise the resilience of both economies and societies. And we have done this through bilateral policy dialogues with leaders, with ministers, through our COVID-19 digital hub, which already has 167 policy briefs, 3 ministerial roundtables in our ministerial council meeting under the leadership of President Sanchez. Again, thank you very much for Spain's and your own leadership, where our members charted a path in this ministerial council meeting. They charted a path towards a strong, resilient, inclusive, sustainable recovery, reflected in the first fully agreed ministerial statement in 4 years. We had not been able to have a ministerial statement agreed among all the members in 4 years. And this time, it was possible. So, chers amis, en ce moment critique où nous réfléchissons aux réalisations passées, nous nous devons aussi de regarder vers l'avenir. Les défis à venir pour cette organisation et ses membres sont plus grands que jamais. Nous devons non seulement surmonter la crise actuelle, mais aussi faire face au changement climatique, aux défis qui menacent la biodiversité, les océans, l'eau. Nous devons gérer la transformation numérique, nous adapter au vieillissement de la population et lutter contre les inégalités. À mesure que nous avançons ensemble, soyez certains que l'OCDE reste déterminée à travailler avec toutes les parties prenantes pour concevoir, développer et mettre en œuvre de meilleures politiques pour des vies meilleures. Merci. President Macron, President Sanchez, now please join me in the unveiling of the plaque for the commemoration of the 60th anniversary of the signing of the OECD Convention.
All right, if everybody could retake their seats, we will continue with the program. Please don't sit down, President Macron. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming President Macron of France to the podium for his keynote remarks.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Secrétaire Général, cher André. Monsieur le Président du Conseil des ministres, cher Pedro, merci d'être là. Monsieur le Président du Conseil européen, cher Charles, merci d'être à Paris aujourd'hui après plusieurs heures passées ensemble à Bruxelles la semaine dernière. Madame la Directrice Générale de l'UNESCO, merci de montrer par votre présence la coopération entre les grandes organisations qui siègent à Paris. Montrer que c'est, ce faisant, un lieu de coopération concrète et d'intelligence collective entre elles. Mesdames et messieurs les ambassadeurs, mesdames et messieurs, chers amis, il y a 60 ans, vous l'avez rappelé, à Paris, 18 pays européens signaient avec le Canada et les États-Unis la Convention créant l'Organisation de coopération et de développement économique. Alors que les fonds du plan Marshall avaient été alloués et que la communauté économique européenne commençait à exister grâce au traité de Rome, le choix a été fait de pérenniser une organisation internationale dédiée au progrès économique et social, à la coopération entre des États partageant les mêmes valeurs. Il faut prendre le temps aujourd'hui de comprendre quels étaient les objectifs des pères fondateurs de l'OCDE. Cette convention de 1960 nous dit que nos économies et nos sociétés sont interdépendantes. Elle nous dit que la coopération économique et sociale doit être au service d'un projet politique. D'ailleurs, votre slogan, si je puis dire, le révèle parfaitement. La paix, le bien-être des peuples, rendre les vies meilleures. Elle nous dit que ce développement économique doit être aussi au service des pays en développement. Et cette convention de 1960, que nous célébrons, portait en elle tous les succès de l'OCDE que nous connaissons aujourd'hui. Ces succès reposent sur une méthode éprouvée, remarquablement efficace, autour de 3 piliers. D'abord des données rigoureuses, permettant à chaque pays de se comparer. Ensuite, des échanges de meilleures pratiques entre experts. Et enfin, des recommandations générales et adaptées à chaque État membre. Des grands succès ont été construits grâce à cette méthode. Ils ont été rappelés par vous-même, Monsieur le Secrétaire Général, à l'instant, par la courte vidéo que nous avons vue. Je pense par exemple à PISA, dans le domaine de l'éducation, qui nous aide à mesurer, à faire progresser nos niveaux scolaires. Je pense bien sûr aux travaux sur la lutte contre l'évasion fiscale, à la fin du secret bancaire, à la lutte contre la corruption. Je pense aussi au rapport de l'OCDE sur les financements du climat en 2015, qui a contribué au succès de la COP21 et de l'accord de Paris. Je pense aux standards de l'OCDE sur la conduite responsable des entreprises, qui sont aujourd'hui la référence internationale en la matière. Et je crois qu'il faut le souligner. Ces succès récents vous doivent beaucoup, Monsieur le Secrétaire général. Dans un contexte où le multilatéralisme est critiqué pour son incapacité à répondre aux grands défis contemporains, il y a un contre-exemple frappant à ce discours, cette fatalité ambiante, c'est celui de l'OCDE, qui fonctionne et qui produit des résultats. C'est pourquoi je voulais vous adresser, Monsieur le Secrétaire général, mon cher ami, les remerciements de la France pour l'action résolue que vous menez à la tête de l'OCDE depuis 2006. C'est aussi une source de grande fierté pour nous d'accueillir à Paris l'OCDE. La France est une terre d'accueil de tous les talents, y compris ceux des organisations internationales. Nous sommes aujourd'hui confrontés à la plus grande crise sanitaire et économique depuis plus d'un siècle. Nous ne sommes pas encore sortis de cette crise, mais on peut déjà en tirer quelques leçons pour l'avenir, leçons qui concernent au premier chef notre organisation. La première leçon, c'est que nous devons être mieux préparés. En termes de sécurité sanitaire d'abord, la pandémie a mis en évidence de nombreuses failles dans notre préparation collective. Elle a souligné la nécessité de mettre en commun nos ressources, nos connaissances. En termes de résilience économique aussi, cette crise a révélé l'interdépendance industrielle, commerciale, financière de nos économies. Elle a mis au grand jour ce que vous documentiez depuis plusieurs années, l'extrême imbrication de nos chaînes de valeur, avec, si je puis dire, tous les atouts que cela représentait perceptibles pour nos consommateurs et toutes les faiblesses que cela représentait potentielles avant cette crise pour nos pays et nos souverainetés. Aucun pays ne doit dépendre d'un seul partenaire pour ses approvisionnements dans les secteurs stratégiques. Et donc nous sommes tous confrontés à ce monde ainsi révélé et à la recomposition de nos chaînes de valeur dans une coopération choisie qui n'est ni la dépendance exclusive, ni évidemment l'isolationnisme nationaliste. Bien une logique de coopération. Pour cela, nous avons et aurons besoin des analyses et des recommandations de l'OCDE. La deuxième leçon de cette crise, c'est que pour être au rendez-vous des grands défis contemporains, les États doivent mieux coordonner leur action. L'OCDE devra continuer d'être une force motrice du multilatéralisme. Les normes souples, ces fameux soft law, on évoque en anglais, montrent la voie en incitant plutôt qu'en imposant, et elles nous seront utiles dans le monde de demain. Et nous avons vu que face à une pandémie internationale qui révélait nos interdépendances, face à ses conséquences économiques et sociales, toutes les réponses doivent être coordonnées et coopératives. Qu'il s'agisse des réponses en termes d'organisation face à l'épidémie, en termes de vaccins, c'est ce que nous sommes en train de voir à travers ACTA et l'initiative COVAX, en termes ensuite de suivi et de résilience de nos systèmes de santé, comme en termes économiques et sociaux. La troisième leçon, c'est que cette crise accélère la numérisation de nos sociétés, de nos économies. Sur ce projet, nous le savons, nous avons besoin de continuer à accélérer sur tous les fronts. Vous avez commencé à nous aider à y participer, vous l'avez évoqué, nous en parlions avec Pedro Sánchez tout à l'heure. Cette crise a révélé sur le plan de l'école, du savoir, de la culture, du travail, de nos fonctionnements propres, la nécessité d'accélérer la numérisation de nos sociétés. Là-dessus, le travail de comparaison, de parangonnage, comme on dit en français, partage des meilleures pratiques est un élément absolument essentiel pour nous aider dans cette numérisation. Sur ce sujet aussi, nous le savons, nous avons besoin d'une fiscalité plus juste. Car si cette crise va continuer à servir d'accélérateur à la numérisation de nos économies, elle rendra encore plus nécessaire le fait qu'une poignée d'entreprises numériques qui réalisent depuis plusieurs années et ont encore davantage réalisé durant cette crise d'énormes bénéfices sans la plupart du temps payer leur juste part d'impôts, ne peuvent continuer à être une réalité de notre vie internationale. C'est de plus en plus inacceptable pour nos citoyens et donc il ne faut plus simplement l'expliquer, il faut y apporter une réponse par la coopération. Vous le savez, la France est très engagée dans les négociations en cours à l'OCDE et souhaite que celles-ci aboutissent au plus tard mi-2021, comme en a décidé le G20. Je crois très profondément qu'en matière de numérisation, une juste fiscalité numérique, dans le cadre de l'OCDE, est la meilleure réponse. La quatrième leçon, c'est que cette crise et la réponse qu'apportent les gouvernements constituent une opportunité pour réorienter en profondeur nos modèles économiques et les rendre plus verts, plus compatibles avec notre défi qui est de lutter contre les dérèglements climatiques et les émissions de gaz à effet de serre et pour la biodiversité. Nous nous sommes engagés au niveau européen à atteindre la neutralité climatique en 2050 et avons rehaussé, il y a quelques jours, nos objectifs pour 2030 à une hauteur d'une réduction de 55% de nos émissions. Mais nous savons aussi qu'il nous reste beaucoup de chemin à parcourir pour se positionner dans les faits sur la bonne trajectoire, atteindre l'objectif de température de l'accord de Paris. C'est l'esprit du plan de relance européen, de nos plans de relance nationaux, et sur ce sujet aussi, nous comptons beaucoup sur l'OCDE. J'ai évoqué plutôt cette méthode de l'OCDE qui est si efficace pour faire avancer les politiques publiques. Nous souhaitons que l'OCDE applique ses outils, sa méthode, son efficacité au service de nos ambitions climatiques. La France a lancé une initiative importante sur ce sujet à l'OCDE et je souhaite que les travaux puissent aboutir rapidement pour que nous ayons à notre disposition un outil de mesure supplémentaire de nos engagements pour le climat et qui nous donne à chacun des recommandations pour atteindre la neutralité carbone d'une façon qui soutienne aussi l'emploi et la prospérité collective. Et l'OCDE doit participer à cette nouvelle étape qui aujourd'hui s'ouvre, qui est la bonne mesure de nos efforts concrets de court terme. Le cœur de nos débats internationaux dans les prochains mois sera là-dessus. Nous nous sommes tous engagés pour 2030, pour 2050. Nous avons tous enclenché des actions. Mais nos peuples vont légitimement nous dire où en êtes-vous? Qui mesure? Qui évalue de manière indépendante? Avec une participation de toutes les expertises à cet égard. La dernière leçon, c'est que cette crise a aggravé ce sujet que vous aviez justement pointé au moment de la crise économique et financière et qui s'est aggravé ensuite à cause des réponses que nous y avons collectivement apportées, c'est le sujet des inégalités. Les inégalités entre pays d'abord, des décennies de progrès accomplis en matière de développement risquent aujourd'hui, en raison de la pandémie, d'être remises en cause. Il est urgent pour l'OCDE d'apporter une réponse durable pour aider les pays les plus vulnérables et en priorité le continent africain. Et je crois que c'est notre défi à tous en tant que membres de l'OCDE. Comment réduire ces inégalités entre pays sur le plan sanitaire, mais aussi économique et social? L'initiative ACTA est un pilier et ce que nous aurons à poursuivre entre Européens et Africains est essentiel. Inégalité au sein des pays ensuite, et il faut y remédier rapidement et solidement pour garantir la cohésion de nos sociétés. Tous les acteurs ont un rôle à jouer à cet égard. Avant tout les États et la puissance publique, mais aussi les entreprises, les ONG, la société civile, la solidarité même entre les citoyens. Et l'OCDE y a participé, entre autres en contribuant à l'initiative Business for Inclusive Growth, B4IG, lancée lors du sommet du G7 de Biarritz. La rigueur, l'inventivité de l'OCDE seront décisives pour catalyser demain ces nouvelles coalitions qui changent la donne. Vous l'avez compris, pour réussir à accompagner le monde en sortie de cette crise, nous aurons besoin, et c'était l'objet de ces quelques leçons que je voulais tirer avec vous aujourd'hui en ce 60e anniversaire, de la méthode, des principes, de la philosophie et de l'efficacité de notre organisation. Nous sommes sans doute à un moment de tournant de notre monde. Nous l'étions avant la pandémie et elle sert de formidable accélérateur, pour le meilleur ou pour le pire. La crise démographique, technologique, climatique, celle des inégalités, est aujourd'hui accélérée, comme révélée encore davantage par la pandémie. Face à cela, je crois dans la science, les faits, l'expertise indépendante, plutôt que dans le complotisme, la manipulation de l'information ou le nouvel obscurantisme. Face à cela, je crois dans la coopération libre, choisie, intelligente, plutôt que dans le repli nationaliste ou la brutalité. Ces deux croyances se trouvent pleinement incarnées par votre organisation et, Monsieur le Secrétaire général, par ce que vous avez su conduire durant ces 14 années ici à Paris, dans le monde entier, pour nous tous. Et donc merci pour cela. Merci à l'organisation, à l'ensemble de ces équipes qui sont ici et à travers le monde à notre service collectif. Et merci à l'ensemble des pays membres. Et comme vous, je souhaite que nous continuions à élargir ce cercle de bonne volonté. Je vous remercie.
Thank you very much indeed, President Macron. Plenty of food for thought there, which we will no doubt pick up on in our panel discussions a little bit later on. Do bear with us for just a few moments. We have to get a few things ready with the lectern and with the microphones and with the podium. Shouldn't take too long. We will be back with you shortly. All right, ladies and gentlemen, it now gives me great pleasure to give the floor to President Sanchez of Spain. President Sanchez, the floor is yours. Thank you very much.
Bonjour, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. It is a great honor to be here together with my friends Emmanuel Macron and Ángel Gurría on such a special occasion, also Charles and the General Director of UNESCO. The OECD is a truly unique multilateral institution whose relevance and soft power has kept on growing, not least in the last 15 years under the leadership of Secretary General Gurría. Not all institutions can say that their membership continues to expand after 60 years of existence. The OECD was originally founded by 19 countries. Very soon, once Costa Rica formally joins the organization and after the addition of Colombia earlier this year, this number will have doubled. Very few institutions have been able to outlive their foundational goals and stay relevant, yet alone to increase their scope and usefulness. The OECD has managed all that and much more. It helped us realize the interdependence of our economies. It paved the way for a new era of cooperation in Europe and beyond. These things, things have changed substantially in these last 60 years. If someone had told our forefathers 60 years ago that Europeans would be using common debt to finance an ambitious recovery fund to tackle the second economic crisis in less than 10 years, they wouldn't have believed it. If they had heard that we are willing to shape the economy of the future after the disruptive pandemic through digitalization and the greatest geopolitical competition and green transition, they wouldn't have understood it. Yet, here we are. All along these 6 decades of progress and change, the OECD has remained a key forum for us to collectively identify problems, discuss and analyze them, and to promote policies to solve them. The OECD has emerged as a global influencer and facilitator of economic growth and well-being. One of the fundamental purposes of the OECD was to achieve the highest possible economic growth and employment levels and rising living standards in member countries. The organization has strived to reach this goal by formulating standards, by helping inform the policies of member countries, and above all, by advancing multilateralism. The ongoing development, at the request of Spain, of a transition strategy to restore the cross-border flows of people through international recognized and coordinated protocol is prime example of the OECD work for the shared benefit of its member countries. These protocols would enable safe international mobility despite the challenging sanitary environment until vaccines are fully rolled out and cross-border travel and tourism can go back to normal. The OECD is also the biggest multilateral think tank and global advisory body. Under the leadership of Secretary General Gurria, new themes such as digitalization, inclusive growth, gender equality, and environmental care have entered the discourse of the OECD and through it of other international institutions. Now that his term is coming to an end, I want to explicitly acknowledge Ángel Gurria's outstanding work and vision to steer this organization throughout all these years. But the OECD is also, as Sanchez said, increasingly becoming a global do tank, understanding specific tasks in the global multilateral system. Chief among them is the area of taxation, where this organization leads the effort to find a global compromise on a digital tax. Through development like this, the OECD has deepened its impact both geographically and in terms of norm setting, not by coercive means, but through best practices based on the rule of law and international fair play. My friends, for some, reaching 60 years of age means thinking about retirement. But that's not the case of the OECD. The 60th anniversary, coming at a time of uncertainty and economic disruption, should bring the OECD renewed energy to guide us through a recovery with a purpose. We face a critical time in our history in which the paradigm of the past, the idea that economic growth automatically trickles down to all sectors of society, is widely discredited. Across the developed world, we are witnessing a thinning of the middle class, increasingly precarious job conditions for blue-collar and platforms workers, and growing polarization in terms of income and wealth. All these trends occur as we have to fight the two biggest challenges of our time. First, to combat the COVID-19 and rebuild our economies, and second, to urgently step up the fight against climate crisis and environmental degradation that threaten life on our planet. This context requires a new growth model that combines equality of opportunity, including gender equality, social and territorial cohesion, technological innovation, and environmental sustainability. My government is fully committed to these goals, which represent the 4 acts of our recovery plans and policies, and which will also guide the EU policies and actions for the years to come. The statement that all the countries of the OECD signed together last October clearly spells out that we want a different model of economic growth, which integrates the fight against inequalities in our policies while we undertake a digital, a green, and an energy transition. Please allow me to share 3 key reflections on this emerging consensus, which have sizable policy implications in our quest to build back better. The first, and contrary to the crowding out approach that prevailed in economic thinking for the last 3 decades, public investment and its crowding in effects should play a central role in this new economic paradigm. They are already a key component of the stimulus and recovery package that we will lay the foundation for a more resilient economy by supporting job-rich, highly productive and greener activities. The state will be the facilitators of all our sustainable development. The second reflection is that reducing inequalities is essential to achieve fair and inclusive growth, not only as an ethical or social justice issue, but also for economic efficiency and resilience, and for the overall health of our democracies. The COVID-19 crisis led to a worsening of wage inequality around the world, only partially offset by state-subsidized and minimum wage policies. Lower paid workers, disproportionately women, and the new precarious youth are the most affected by the rise in inequalities. It is time that labor regulations foster productivity through fair wage, decent working conditions, and enhance social dialogue. It is time to make sure that no one is left behind. My government in Spain is firmly committed to reversing those trends. We have increased the minimum salaries, introduced a minimum living income for vulnerable families, and put in place short-time work and furlough schemes to protect jobs during the pandemic and beyond. We're reforming our education, our vocational training system to make it more inclusive, and working to eradicate the opportunity and pay gap between men and women. And we are set to adopt the most ambitious social and progressive budget in the history of my country. Third, renewed multilateral action will be crucial to implement this new paradigm, just as it is proving crucial in defeating COVID-19. This crisis should be an accelerator of reforms, both domestically and internationally. It should also accelerate and deepen our commitment to a level playing field, to a rules-based and fair multilateral trading system, and to tackle together long-lasting global challenges such as climate change, preserving biodiversity, or eradicating poverty. Because it is only if we all work together that we will successfully achieve our goals. All these emerging concepts are already present in our economic thinking. We're just at the beginning of a long process, but we know that the economic growth alone, it is not anymore the answer to attain well-being and prosperity for all. Economic growth is not just rate to reach. It should also have a direction, a clear purpose, improving the well-being of the majority of citizens, reducing inequalities, and transitioning to a decarbonized economy. Public investment and regulatory change are therefore needed. Progress means that the status quo will be challenged, but we shall prevail. The role of the OECD must continue to evolve to face these new challenges and deepen its role as the multilateral forum where new consensus are formulated and built. I am certain that the organization and all of you will be up to the task. As we celebrate the past, let us look to the future with optimism and determination. The world we deserve is in our hands. Dear colleagues, dear Angel, dear Emmanuel, I will not take more of your time. Let us now move to the first panel discussion, precisely to exchange views on this emerging consensus. I'm very much looking forward. Merci beaucoup. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much indeed, President Sanchez, and plenty of ideas there that will also help inform our first panel discussion, which I will get underway in just a moment. Give us 30 seconds or so just to move this podium one more time, do a little bit of cleaning, and then we will get underway. Plenty on the table, of course, lots of big ideas that we can ask the leaders about. Bear with us just for a few more seconds. Thank you very much indeed. All right, we move now to that first panel discussion, the first of three, a chance to dig a little deeper into some of the issues facing most, if not all, of the leaders joining us today. President Michel has joined the others on the stage. I would also like to welcome three new guests joining us virtually, two from the other side of the world. We have Prime Minister Ardern of New Zealand. A warm welcome to you, Prime Minister. President Duque from Colombia, and the President of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen. We know it's been an extremely busy time for you, Madam President. Certainly no shortage of issues to talk about. In fact, my difficulty has been trying to keep up with so many fast-moving stories. But we start our discussions on the theme of recovery. What should guide it? What it should look like? How to frame it to electorates deeply worried about their health, their livelihoods, and about just how much longer the planet we live on can hold out. President Macron Erosion, I am aware that you have to leave us in about 10 minutes or so, so I am going to kick off, if I may, with you and pick up on a couple of points that you made. On the multilateralism, first up, I would like to ask you, Mr. President, just how optimistic you feel now that we can get things back on track, given we have someone new in the White House from January 20th.
Thank you very much. Look, I think a lot of things depend on us. And for me, the main test on multilateralism will be about management of this COVID crisis. Whoever's in charge, if we manage to cooperate on vaccines, solidarity vis-à-vis emerging countries and especially Africa, we will put ourselves in a situation to resume de facto multilateralism. So for me, I would say the first test would be the answer to COVID-19 crisis around this, I would say, ACTA initiative. The second point is obviously about climate change. Yeah. And this is the second test, how to do vis-à-vis vulnerable countries. Jacinda is perfectly aware of that and so committed with us, and I see her. And de facto, we managed to do our job at the European level. US and China should move in the coming months. If we deliver on this way, I think we can have concrete results. So for me, I'm reasonably optimistic if we manage on these two short-term issues with very long-term impact to work closely together.
I want to pick up on climate, and I promise you I will come to the others shortly. I want to pick up on climate. You spoke about this in your address, Mr. President. Can you honestly say that you have fully leveled with your populations, any of you, about what's at stake in the climate crisis and the scale of change really needed to address this? We see government leaders standing together with scientific medical officers talking about the pandemic. When will we see government leaders standing next to climate scientists looking at charts on climate?
I think we started with the GIEC and a lot of this type of experts and bodies, and de facto, we built our European Green Deal on the basis of scientists' approach on these charts. The communication was different because it was not seen as a short-term crisis. And probably collectively, this is a mistake. And you're right. We can probably try to embody differently such a crisis and have a different management. But our strategy, our regional and national level, is definitely based on scientific facts, is worked and built on with academics and so on. So you're right. This is de facto how we work. The question is perhaps how to make it more perceivable by our people.
Indeed. And finally, I wonder, a general question. Are you more heartened, Mr. President, or horrified by the way the world has reacted this year? On the downside, national rivalries on vaccines, an upsurge in conspiracy theories, fake news, fresh fuel for the populists. On the upside, of course, we've seen companies pull together on vaccines, governments putting people before fiscal rules, the recovery fund. Final thought from you, does the global balance come out net positive or negative at the end of all of this, do you think?
I mean, we will see that in 10 years' time. I would say this kind of crisis is a super accelerator of the best and the worst, for sure. And you mentioned that. I think it accelerated a lot of things. Science. I mean, nobody did imagine that in less than 1 year time we could invent a vaccine against such a virus totally unknown a few months ago. Indeed, inventive cooperation, and especially when I look at the European level and what we delivered collectively with Charles and Ursula, Pedro, and all the other leaders. I mean, nobody expected that. With ACTA, what we launched, now we have to deliver. It's not yet done. And on the other side of the picture, you're right. We saw a lot of selfishness, a lot of unproductive, I would say, competition, and this neo-obscurantism with fake news and all the guy obsessed by possible plots and so on. But this is where we have to work harder and harder. How to make our social networks more positive and based on facts, how to fight all together in a cooperative approach against these hatred speeches. And this is what we launched with Christchurch calls, by the way, and it is very important in such a context. How to work collectively to have more science and common knowledge in order to base our decisions. I mean, all in all, I'm a strong believer that this crisis will accelerate the best if we work very closely together and if we just try to address the bad and build collective positive answers.
Okay. President Macron, many thanks for talking with us. Apologies to the others, by the way, I haven't brought you in. The protocol people will be having words with me, no doubt, afterwards. Prime Minister Ardern, let me kick it off with you. Thanks for joining us. You made a successful sales pitch, for want of a better phrase, to your electorate recently. How hard is it, Prime Minister, to keep such an increasingly bewildered public, racked by so much uncertainty, on side? What resonates most loudly with them?
Well, I think, first of all, just ensuring that there isn't bewilderment. Look, there's no question that for everyone, there has been no particular rule book for a pandemic of this nature. But I think our populations have appreciated knowing that leaders have shared information as they've seen it. They've openly communicated the questions that we've had to grapple with and chosen a path that resonated with the population. So from New Zealand's perspective, our approach to COVID was a wellbeing approach. Our view was that there was no economy without our people. And when we analysed the impact of COVID on our population base, it was very clear that elimination strategy was the right approach for us. Now, I acknowledge that it's not necessarily possible for everyone. We have a rather large moat around New Zealand, so that's enabled us to put in place controls that aren't possible everywhere. But it ultimately was a wellbeing approach, and it's one that I think we have lived to feel very pleased about having brought in place.
All right. Look, I'll come back to that, Prime Minister. Thank you. President Michel, let me ask you, on the back of what we've just heard from Prime Minister Ardern, is it an approach, the well-being approach, the happiness index, is that something that can work in Europe?
Yes, I'm convinced that it's really key to think what are the possible criteria that we can use at the democratic level in order to demonstrate that we are improving the well-being of the people. And this is the fundamental goal of this European project. Article 3 of the treaty mentioned this goal, the well-being of the people, the dignity of the people. And I think we should think politically, what are the criteria that we can consider in order to assess year after year, are we making more progress? And you know, this crisis is a unique opportunity. It's a big challenge, but it's a unique opportunity in order to rethink the way we are working, the way we are taking decisions together at the collective level. And I hope in Europe, and maybe also with the support of organizations such as the OECD, we can try to make some progress. Next year, in Portugal, we will have an important summit, a social summit. And the question is how to take into consideration those big, difficult transitions, the digital one, the climate change, in order to make more progress and to take into consideration for our people those important goals.
So just to very quickly follow up on that, you are saying to us that this sort of progressive policy making can work in Europe, can become defining parts of European nations' budgets.
Yeah, but look, the recent months, something really interesting happened in many different countries in Europe, but not only in Europe, when we took the very difficult decisions with regard to the lockdown, it was a clear choice. It was a choice for health, for the well-being of the people. It was more important than the economic development. It was a very strong and clear choice politically that we made. And this is an interesting signal, and that's why we think, for example, that this question of resilience is so important. How is it possible to be better prepared at the European level, but more generally at the global level, against the different crises, against the different shock? And this is also the translation of our priorities. The question of the fight against inequalities, for example, the sustainability, it's another very concrete example, and that's why I hope that we can make more progress on all those issues in the next months.
Okay, thank you very much indeed, President Michel. President Duque, if I could bring you in. Colombia, of course, joined the OECD in April of this year. How has accession helped inform the way that you're pitching recovery, President Duque, in your country and boosted the momentum for reform?
Well, I first of all think that for us to be the 27th member of the OECD represents a big change and a very important instrument for us to accelerate reforms. As you well know, we have already launched a plan, which is the recovery plan for Colombia. And there are three elements that we have been working closely with the OECD. The first is we want to bring back better, greener. And we have made a clear commitment that we want to reduce our CO2 emissions by 51% for 2030. We have also said that we want to become a carbon neutral country by 2050. And we are now leading the energy transition in Latin America, especially focusing on non-conventional renewables. The second thing is inclusive recovery. And that means that we're going to expand, like no other time before, the access to free public education. We are now getting to 30% of all the students in public education being paid by the government, and we'll get to 50% by the end of our term. But at the same time, we're making the largest expansion on water and storage, and we're also reducing social gaps in the rural areas. And the other element that is very important is how do we bring this as a gender revolution? And that's how we close the gaps between salary differences between men and women. So we want to make this inclusive. And last but not least is how do we accelerate technology? And that's why in the latest index that was published by the OECD, Colombia became the third country in the world accelerating the digital reform in government and other services. So we see this as an opportunity, and as the OECD well says, better policies for better lives. We want to work with the OECD so that all these policies will be accelerated and will be producing a big impact on the Colombian population.
Very quickly, President Duque, to follow up on that, we heard Prime Minister Ardern talk about what resonates in her country. What resonates in Colombia, given the way you need to bring in the informal workforce? Given you mentioned the rural areas and the importance of providing for the rural areas, what do these people need from you?
Well, I think there are three basic challenges that we have to face. The first one is informality. Informality in Latin America has been very high. How do we tackle informality? We need to have more SMEs. So that's why with this reform program that we have launched, and also with the recovery plan, what we want to do is bring more resources and let the SMEs become the drivers of the generating of new employments. The second thing is that in the rural areas, we want to build what we have called the contractual agriculture. And that means that the buyers will connect to the small peasants, and they will have a fair contract long-term with the lowest interest rates that we have ever had in the rural areas. But at the same time, we need to provide them credit and training so that they keep on expanding the agricultural border. With that, we're going to make a big reform in the rural areas. And last but not least is how can we make a big transformation in productivity? And that only comes through education and technology. That's why we have made a big bet on double titling, so that when every student graduates from high school, it has in one hand the high school diploma, and in the other hand the technician diploma. So with an initial year of virtual training, he can become a professional. But he's going to be trained with the right elements to be participant in the fourth industrial revolution. That's why we're working on AI, IoT, cloud computing, so that we give the pertinent training to the students and they can become actors at a starting role in this fourth industrial revolution.
All right, President, thank you very much indeed. President von der Leyen, I know you're deep in Brexit negotiations, and I will come back to that, I'm afraid, at some point. But this crisis has clearly been a catalyst for consensus. We saw recently on the budget, on climate, to the surprise, I think, of many skeptics. Is this, Madam President, indicative of the sort of progress and consensus to come? Or is that wishful thinking, given the deep underlying rifts that clearly exist among member states?
Well, we have seen that the old saying, never waste a crisis, is correct, because at the very beginning of the COVID crisis, there was an instinctive trend towards inward looking and reacting on the member state level. But we saw very fast that this crisis is too big for any member state or any country at all to overcome it by itself. And then the turnaround was interesting. There was a lot of trust then into the European institutions, with the task of, we proposed to build up Next Generation EU with the new budget, which is now 1.8 trillion that will be invested in recovering, but also preparing for the future. And it's fascinating to listen here to the panel. It is these big trends that are now emerging. It is, thanks God, by now, the big trend in getting greener and more sustainable, and having the European Green Deal, for example, as our new growth strategy. Yep. It's a huge trend of digitalization. And the topic of resilience is the new one, mainly looking at the health topic. So, and these are all topics no member state is able to manage them on its own, but together as 27, yep, as one united Europe, we have an enormous strength to move forward.
And I will come on to the Green New Deal in just a second, but let me get this right, though. You are telling us on budget, on climate, the EU 27 are now properly united behind you.
They are. This was one of the results of the Council, European Council, but you also see that we are deeply convinced that in, for example, standing up, fighting the climate change, we have a responsibility to show leadership, to move forward. And to show that growth is possible, but a growth that is sustainable and that is clean and that is healthy, and that it's worth to invest in the new technologies, because this is not only good for the planet, it's not only good for people, but it will also be, there will also be a strong demand over time worldwide to have these new technologies. And if we are able to prove that you can have growth that is sustainable, that is clean, then we are moving a big step forward.
All right, thank you very much indeed. President Sanchez, we heard this scale again. Do we need a new global settlement, a new grand institutional architecture to move us through this?
Well, I think so. I think that, as Ursula and Charles said, at the European level, we understood in the beginning of the crisis the need to share not only knowledge, but also to be united against this pandemic that doesn't understand borders or ideologies or gender issues. So I think that we have to move forward. I think that the World Health Organization is an institution that we need to strengthen. Also, the OECD has been very useful and helpful for all of us, because we found a place where we can get information, share knowledge, see good best practices in order to face different perspective of this pandemic. So I'm a firm believer of multilateralism, and I think that it is crucial for all of us to strengthen multilateralism in the years to come.
Is President Sanchez, is the US firmly back at the table in your mind? and would this year have been easier had Joe Biden been president of the United States?
Well, I didn't understand, and I said this publicly many times. I didn't understand this vision of the Trump administration blaming the European Union and let's say saying that the European Union is an enemy of the United States. It's the contrary. I'm firmly believe on the transatlantic relation. We were speaking about it in the last council, but let me tell you, since Duque is here and the Secretary General comes from Mexico, I think that the European Union is also very, very linked to Latin America, and this is a continent, a part of the continent that we need to, let's say, to approach, especially after this pandemic and the social consequences.
I will pick up on that in just a moment. President von der Leyen, very quickly, and Prime Minister Erdogan, I will come back to you. And by the way, feel free to jump in. I want to keep this interactive. President von der Leyen, you talked about renewing and reinvigorating the U.S. relationship. What does that mean? What does that look like over the next 6 months?
Well, briefly, what we know for sure, we are not going to pick up where we left 4 years ago, because the world has changed, the United States have changed, and we have changed. But what I see is that we can start a new transatlantic agenda that is indeed focused on developing together a sustainable vision, a fight against climate change, a green vision. To set the standards, how we're dealing with technology and mainly digitalization, so that we have a human-centered approach to digitalization and mainly AI. So it's not the market who's going to regulate it, it's not the government, but it's a human-centric approach to deal with data. And, of course, then have a look at the resilience of this world and the new topic, of course, what are the lessons learned from the COVID crisis, will shape this common transatlantic agenda.
President Michel, having the US on side, as an ally on climate, how much easier will that make things?
In the European perspective, it's very important to be totally committed at the diplomatic level in order to support this green agenda. And indeed, we hope with the new American administration that it will be again possible to work together in order to be ambitious. This is the same when we have a summit a few weeks ago, for example, with the Chinese authorities. We are totally committed with the 27 member states in order to encourage a country like China to make more progress on this topic. It's also a question of fairness, and that's why at the trade level we think it's very important also to work with a country like America, like the United States, the same with Japan, for example, in order to try to develop the same common agenda and to consider climate change as an important leverage in order to improve our economic relationships.
I'm going to continue with climate in just a sec, but you mentioned China. So, Prime Minister Erdogan, I can't really help asking you this. Are you less skittish about the US-China relationship going forward from your perspective?
We are not naive. We don't think with this new administration in the United States that tomorrow everything will be easy between Europe and the United States. But at the same time, we think that we will have a more positive channel of communication, a more positive channel of dialogue, that it will be possible to have a better mutual understanding. And about China, we have in Europe a clear vision. We discussed a lot the recent months at the level of the leaders, the 27 leaders, and we have a united approach. What are our priorities? First, we want to engage with China, especially at the multilateral level. A topic like climate change, health, COVID-19, we think we need to work together. We need to cooperate, point one. Point two, we need to rebalance our relationship with China. We need more reciprocity, we need more clarity, the state aid regime, for example. And point three, important in Europe, we don't paper over our values, our democratic values, and we don't hesitate to promote our strong democratic values, the human rights, etc.
Okay, President Michel, thank you. Prime Minister Erdogan, same question to you. I mean, this is a critical relationship for you. Are you less skittish about the US-China relationship going forward? Is there reason to be optimistic here?
I don't think skittish is necessarily, Alex, the word that I would use. You know, we're pragmatic. Yes, we've had a change of leadership in the United States, and that fundamentally, lends itself to potentially a different approach. I think we may see a slightly less combative approach. However, I don't think we should be so naive to assume that suddenly the foundation of some of the contested space has fundamentally shifted. I think that there are still some domestic realities for the United States in the trade area that they may indeed conduct their diplomatic relations in a more predictable way, but some of those underlying issues and tensions, I expect, may still remain.
Yeah, okay. Shifting back to climate, you recently declared a climate of framing actually allow you to do that you couldn't before. Is it more symbolic, or does it actually translate into faster decarbonisation? And I ask you that because I wonder why others aren't going this way, as the UN Secretary General Guterres hopes they will.
A number have. We are certainly by no means the first nation to do this. A number have. And I think what we're essentially flagging is that, at least in New Zealand, for the most part, climate emergency or declarations of emergencies tend to be left to civil defence emergency, floods, severe weather events. What we're flagging here is that actually climate change is inextricably linked with these issues. They do exacerbate those issues for which we often do declare national emergencies. And so it's acknowledging the urgency of the issue. It is, however, just that, a declaration. We coupled it with a plan around decarbonisation of our public sector, but it also must be attached to a comprehensive approach. We, for instance, are one of those few privileged countries where the majority of our emissions comes from agriculture, well over 40%. The low-hanging fruit of energy generation and transport for us is a bit different than for most nations. So we're really, I think, at the forefront of having to determine how can we be a food-producing nation and yet reduce our emissions at the same time. So we are very focused on the research and development. We are amongst the first nation to commit to pricing our agricultural emissions, because we know if we can find our way through on food production and the threat it poses for climate change, then we can demonstrate a path through for other countries where once they deal with their low-hanging fruit, they'll be looking at food production as well. Okay,
President Sanchez, on this issue, you among all the others have talked about a green recovery. My question is this, though: a focus on net zero targets for 2050 is one thing, but what about now? What about next year? If we can reconvene a year from now, what can we expect to have done over the next 12 months?
Well, I think the most important thing is to that people understand that this ecological transition means jobs, prosperity, enterprises, and let's say opportunities for all. I think it's crucial for all of us to create an integrative perspective of the ecological transition. And this is the challenge that we're facing also in Spain, where different territories within Spain are touched by this energetic transition, and we have to explain and engage companies in order to create opportunities in these territories. So my political goal is always explain people that ecological transition, energy transition means jobs, prosperity, economic growth.
Are we, President Michel, are we seeing enough from governments to prioritize and fund climate-related research and development? Well, in terms of the funds, and in terms of trying to woo the private sector as well, are we seeing enough in this space?
The first point is to give a clear signal, to take a clear orientation. At the European level, what we have decided a few months ago and confirmed last week, the fact that we will mobilize 1.8 trillion euros during the next years. This is a very strong signal, and 30% at least of this amount will be dedicated to our green ambitions. Point one. Point two, I think that we need a new paradigm. I mean, the last decades, we have developed our economies through the exploitation of the natural resources. And now we consider that we need new resources. And for example, the circular economy is something which is very important in the future, because it means that something which was seen in the past as a waste is now a product, is now a resource. And the same at the digital level. The digital data is the new resources on which we need to base our economic development in the future. It means a totally new approach in comparison with the past. We took very strong decisions in Europe, climate neutrality that we have decided 1 year ago, and 2 days ago when we took the decision to increase our common goals by 2030.
Okay, President Michel, thank you. President Duque, just a quick word from you on the climate piece. It's clearly a critical issue for you as well, given what's going on next door, given what's going on with the rainforest. How prepared are you to stand up to some of the climate deniers, some in your close proximity?
Well, I think we have to be always based on scientific research. But let me say something very clear. Colombia only represents 0.4% of all the CO2 emissions worldwide. But we're one of the highest vulnerable countries on the effects of climate change. So that's why we have made very clear commitments. We have said we want to reduce CO2 emissions 51% by 2030. We have also said we want to become carbon neutral by 2050. But we have also said two very important things. One is that we're going to pass from 0.2% of our energy matrix based on non-conventional renewables to more than 14% in the next 2 years. And we have also said that we want to plant 180 million trees by August 2022. We're going to close this year with 50 million trees that are already been planted, and we have called the private sector to participate in a circular economy policy with the idea of producing, conserving, and conserving, producing. And we want all individuals in Colombia to be highly conscious on how to reduce the individual footprint in terms of CO2 emissions. And that's why we have also concentrated on an education platform that calls the people to use, recycle, reduce, and also to be able to connect every single activity in reducing the individual footprint. With that, I think Colombia wants to play a key role, a leadership role in Latin America. And let me say something. That's why we have also called countries to participate in the protection of the Amazon and high-altitude ecosystems, because these are ecosystems that are much needed if we really want to make an important effort to contain climate change effects.
All right, thank you very much. President von der Leyen, the Green New Deal, I said I was going to come back to this. You know, I asked President Macron whether leaders, including himself, were doing enough to level with their electorates about what's really at stake here. I talked to President Sanchez about what can be done in the next 12 months rather than throwing it ahead some decades. I'd be interested to hear your response on both of those things. Are European countries, not just European countries, many countries around the world, are they doing enough? Are they being honest enough? Are they being clear enough with their electorates about what's at stake and the sort of change that really needs to happen pretty much across every sector? A war footing, I think the OCCP called it, is needed.
I think we all know that we have to be more ambitious because this climate crisis is so huge, and the time left before we reach tipping points is so short that we all know that speeding up and being more ambitious is absolutely necessary. And therefore, for example, next year, we're coming with a whole set of new regulations that are detailing out how we're going to reach the goal we've set ourselves with decreasing 55% of CO2 emissions, greenhouse gas emissions. So we have to really be transparent on exactly measuring also that we are reaching our goals. And here, this is an enormous effort for the whole world. And the time that is left is short. We have a decade, perhaps, to really improve things. Otherwise, we're reaching tipping points, and then a vicious cycle starts. And therefore, everybody has already an idea of what is going on if you look at the extreme weather phenomena, for example, the droughts and the floods and the fires. But this is just the beginning, and therefore, it's urgent.
Okay. Couple of other bits and pieces I want to touch on before we wrap this up. I've got to ask you a question on Brexit, President von der Leyen. I understand no one wants to be the first to walk away from the table, but realistically, you've been talking for a year now. You've been having the same conversation on the same issues. What gives you reason to think that something can be pulled out of the bag here?
Well, first of all, there's movement. That is good. And the transition period ends. So we're talking about a new beginning with old friends, but we should also be clear from the 1st of January on, and this is in 3 weeks, the UK will be a third country to the European Union. And what we have sorted out such a package already in the agreement, but what is essential now to finalize the one and only important question, that is, if the UK wants a seamless access to the single market, and the single market of the European Union is the largest one in the whole world, they are welcome. But they either have to play by our rules, because this is a matter of fairness for our companies in the single market, or the other choice is there's a price on it, and the price is quota and tariffs. But this is what we are just sorting out at the very end.
Should we read into these prolonged discussions that negotiators have not yet exhausted all options?
Exactly. We're on the very last mile to go. But it's an essential one, and we want a level playing field. We want a level playing field not only at the start, but also over time. And this is the architecture we are building. And we are fine about the architecture itself, but the details in it, do they really fit? And these are crucial points, because, again, it's a matter of fairness. It's a matter of fair competition, and we want to ensure that.
Okay. President von der Leyen, thank you. Look, we're running out of time. I'm told we've only got a few minutes left. A couple of things I want to finish with. First, and Prime Minister Ardern, let me put it to you. Have female leaders been better at rallying their voters to combat this pandemic than their male counterparts? I know you've been asked this on a number of occasions. What are your thoughts? Very briefly, and I'd like to hear everyone else's as well.
Do you know, I don't know how well placed I am to answer that question. I'd love for us to be in a position where we're instead just analysing different styles of leadership rather than seeing it as necessarily gendered. All I can say is that I'm not an epidemiologist. I do not have a background in infectious diseases. I've always been willing to humble myself to this role in this position, and in doing so, take the advice of experts in the field. And there's been no better demonstration of why it's so important for us to listen to an evidence base than a global pandemic, where we literally were learning alongside one another. And so I'd like to think that our approach in New Zealand has been one both where we've been evidence-based, but as I said in the beginning, where we also focused on a wellbeing approach that actually said flattening the curve is not enough for us. A flattened curve in New Zealand would have meant a high mortality rate, and that wasn't tolerable to us.
Yep. Okay.
So maybe that's gendered leadership, or maybe that's just leadership.
Does anyone else want to say anything on this? President Sanchez. Not to put you on the spot.
I completely agree with Jacinda. I think that you need to face this huge challenge with humble. You have to be humble. You have to be transparent in the information. You have to base your decisions on science, and of course try to build up unity among political parties, among, of course, society.
Okay, President Duque, did you put your... Yeah, please, come on in.
I'll say something briefly. At the beginning of the pandemic, what we saw was a lot of demagoguery saying that there was a dilemma between protecting the health system and protecting the population and vis-a-vis the economy. I think what we have all seen is that both things have to be on a balance. What we can tell from our experience is that we have been able to work along in expanding the ICU capacity, the testing capacity, the tracing capacity, the isolation capacity, and at the same time, being able to recover the economy in a safe way. We're now at 92% of recovery rate. And I think we want that to continue. And the only way that this can work along is not just the government making decisions, but also the behavior of the population. And I should say the Colombian people have behaved very well so far, and we want to keep them very much aware that this is not over yet, and that we need to keep on recovering with the population being acknowledgeable of social distancing, the usage of masks, and at the same time avoiding multitudes.
All right. Look, I want to thank all of you. I do want to get a final comment from you, Secretary General. We've touched on a number of issues that we haven't been able to touch on. But give us your overall thoughts. And actually, let me pose it to you with this question. And it's delicate, and I have to be diplomatic here. But I wonder what it says about leadership when competence, when doing the job, is held up as exceptional in these times, or comes across as exceptional in these times. What does that say about leadership?
Well, it says that we're not having Ursula today because she's in Brussels, because she is going the last mile, going the last mile, and we hope she's going to get a deal. She's... Charles Michel and Ursula have done a lot of things in the last few weeks, in the last few months. But of course, this is one very important. I have to say, when you're talking about leadership, here you have Jacinda Ardern, who just had the well-being budget approved, a budget all based on well-being. Well, that is an initiative. That is something new. That is original. But also she got it done, and it's happening. With President Duque, we're going to sign a little later in the day. We're going to sign virtually an agreement to support the reform program of Colombia. Again, you're moving in a direction in which you're going to the you're going to the reforms as a fundamental question. So reform all the time. Here, I want to say that when the world got together, when Europe got together to deal with a package, with the 750 and the, which part was grants and which part was, that was, for me, looking from the outside and not being European, the single most important moment in terms of European unity and European integration going forward. And here we have Charles, who was critical about that. And of course, Mr. Sanchez, President Sanchez, who not only chaired our ministerial council meeting, but also was the one who has been pushing the question of social protection, make everything in the guise of not only green, but also more inclusive, the question of inclusiveness. So I would say this is a kind of exercise, together with President Macron, who just left, multilateralism, climate. I would say these are the type of, this is the leadership that we're following, this is the leadership that we're serving.
Secretary General, thank you very much indeed for those closing thoughts. President Duque, Prime Minister Ardern, President Michel, President von der Leyen, and President Sanchez. I mean, getting all of you to talk on one panel is a feat in itself. So given how busy you are, hopefully we've stirred some thoughts. Hopefully we got some news out of this as well. And thanks again to President Macron.
Jacinda, it's also 1 o'clock in the morning, I think, in, yeah. 1 o'clock in the morning in New Zealand. So thank you very much.
We will let you all go now. Thank you very much indeed to all of you. Thank you. Right. As everyone is leaving, I'd like to introduce the first set of pre-recorded video messages from leaders who couldn't be with us today. Just to note, the order in which these are being played out mirrors the dates respective nations ratified the OECD Convention. Let's play this first batch of videos.
I'm pleased to join you in commemorating the 60th anniversary of the signature of the OECD Convention. At a time when the world faces the devastating COVID-19 pandemic, the climate crisis and other severe challenges, the collective action enshrined in the OECD Convention is needed more than ever. The OECD plays an important role in the world's efforts to implement the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, the Paris Agreement, the Addis Ababa Action Agenda, and other frameworks for advancing human well-being. It is a key norm-setting body and a trusted source of data and analysis. Crucially, the OECD Development Assistance Committee provides a lifeline for many countries. The pandemic's economic fallout is taking a heavy toll on the most vulnerable, increasing extreme poverty for the first time in decades. I urge all members to remain steadfast to the 0.7% official development assistance commitment made 50 years ago. And I call on all of them to support the ACT Accelerator and its COVAX facility so that a COVID vaccine can reach everyone, everywhere. The United Nations will also count on you to align recovery efforts with the Sustainable Development Goals and our climate objectives, including carbon neutrality by 2050. On these and other challenges, we look forward to continued partnership in overcoming crises and building a more sustainable and equitable future for all on a healthy planet. I offer the OECD my very best wishes as you mark this milestone. Thank you.
Hello everyone, bonjour à tous. For 60 years, the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development has worked diligently to build better policies for better lives. As one of the founding members of the organization, Canada continues to be committed to working with OECD members to help establish new standards for social, economic, and environmental policy, and to help foster prosperity, equality, and opportunity for all. Today, as all of our countries continue to grapple with the COVID-19 crisis and the health and economic challenges that it has created for our people, we must recommit our support for the OECD and other multilateral institutions. Because we can only end the virus in our own countries if we end it everywhere. We need a united global effort that ensures everyone has equitable access to a potential vaccine. And we need to collectively learn lessons from this global crisis so we can build back better and deepen cooperation on issues that affect us all. Ici au Canada, on relève ce défi. On a investi dans des installations mondiales pour assurer un accès équitable aux vaccins. On s'est engagé à prendre des mesures plus audacieuses pour lutter contre les changements climatiques. On crée un plan d'action pour les femmes dans l'économie et on trouve des solutions pour contrer le racisme systémique et l'injustice au sein de notre société et de nos institutions. All of our countries have the opportunity to build a safer, cleaner, more prosperous world for everyone. But to further end the inequalities that many around the world face, we must first end the pandemic. And Canada believes that the OECD can be a driving force in strengthening multilateralism, supporting a strong recovery, and building a more resilient world. Together, we can defeat COVID-19 and tackle the other great challenges of our time. Thank you. Merci.
Thank you, President Macron, President Sanchez, and Secretary General Gurria, for the opportunity to speak with you today. It is an honor to be with you all to celebrate the 60th anniversary of the OECD. I bring you greetings from President Donald J. Trump. 60 years ago, on December 14, 1960, our nations came together and signed the OECD Convention, pledging to promote economic growth and improve the economic and social well-being of our people. Since that day, the OECD has become an indispensable forum for promoting and sharing the best practices of market democracies. In the last few months alone, we have seen how the transparent data and analysis and open dialogue launched here has helped the world grapple with the COVID pandemic and its economic fallout. I would also like to applaud the OECD's recent efforts to forge a consensus solution to the tax challenges associated with digitalization, as well as create joint principles for the development of trustworthy artificial intelligence. Time and again, the OECD has proven itself a critical forum where freedom-loving countries can work together to support free markets, encourage fair trade, investment and innovation, fight corruption, and promote transparency and the rule of law. This is the economic formula that improved the lives of hundreds of millions of people around the world and took many people out of poverty. Today, the OECD serves as a shining example of a simple but important fact. Freedom produces better results than authoritarianism. Its mission has never been more important. As a founding member of the OECD and its single largest contributor, the United States remains deeply committed to the OECD and its mission. In fact, for the first time in history, the United States has nominated a candidate to serve as Secretary General, Chris Liddell. Chris has a plethora of experience internationally and at the highest levels of government and the private sector. This is a testament to the central importance of the OECD at this critical time in which authoritarian powers are seeking to distort the core principles of international trade, investment, and economic competition. Accordingly, we seek your support for Chris's candidacy. As we celebrate the partnership at the OECD and look ahead to 2021 and beyond, let us reaffirm our commitment to this important institution, the values for which it stands, and a peaceful and prosperous future for all of our nations. God bless you all, and God bless the United States of America. Thank you very much.
The 60th anniversary of the OECD is an important moment because it's brought nations together, and while the world in which we celebrate this Diamond Jubilee is very different to the one in which the representatives of 22 nations gathered in the Quai d'Orsay in Paris and put their names to the founding convention, the cooperation and the joint working that's been made possible by the OECD is really hugely important. It's provided a forum for us policymakers to exchange insights and experiences. It's a great advocate for something that we in this country, in the UK, care about very much, free, fair trade, and it shares all kinds of data and analysis with everybody that needs it, and very welcome that is too. The OECD gives us the tools we need to serve the people we represent. And as the UK builds back better from coronavirus and sets off on our fantastic new national journey outside the EU, global Britain, I look forward to many more years of close cooperation and productive partnership made possible by the OECD. Happy anniversary, and here's to the next 60 years.
Dear President, dear Prime Minister, dear Secretary General, today we celebrate the 60th anniversary of the signing of the OECD Convention. I want to thank the Secretary General for his strong leadership over a quarter of these 60 years. Today we also celebrate the importance of our collaboration, the fact that some challenges are only solved when we work together. This is the case with taxation. Ensuring that everyone contributes their fair share through a global minimum corporate tax rate, and that we pave the way for a digital taxation that tackles the new business models of global tech giants. Here, good work is already being done, but we need to go further. The green transition is another area. Here we welcome the OECD's good work on the economic consequences of the green transition to help member states in designing their efforts after COVID-19. Next year, member states will adopt a new vision statement for the organization, setting the direction for OECD post-COVID-19. I believe that both the digital and green will be key elements. The strength of OECD is, of course, that it is a fact-based organization. OECD has been important for us for 60 years. It will remain so as we address the challenges of the future. This is the reason why my government has proposed a candidate for Secretary General of OECD, Deputy Secretary General Ulrik V. Knudsen. This is a strong signal for our support to the organization and our commitment to its fundamental values. Thank you.
Dear Secretary General, dear colleagues, the ongoing pandemic has devastating consequences in so many ways. However, COVID-19 also represents an opportunity to rethink, improve, and build back stronger, more resilient, greener, bluer, and more inclusive society. The recovery is an opportunity to strengthen our approach to pre-existing challenges. So let me highlight one: a sustainable ocean. A sustainable ocean economy is part of the solution. The report from the Ocean Panel, launched earlier this month, highlights how important ocean industries are to development. The OECD's own research also shows that the ocean has an enormous potential for value creation and growth, and a vital role to play in the recovery. If managed wisely, the oceans can help us to meet the expanding need for food, for medicine, for energy and minerals. For 6 years, the OECD has been unique in the multilateral family. OECD has facilitated political decisions based on science through its data collection and research. The organization has also been an important standard setter for international development. We have learned from each other at the OECD, and this will continue to be important. The OECD has been, and continues to be, a central part of our coordinated efforts. I congratulate the OECD on its 60th anniversary.
Saygıdeğer liderler, Sayın Genel Sekreter, değerli katılımcılar, sizleri şahsım ve milletim adına en kalbi duygularımla selamlıyorum. Başlangıcından itibaren üyesi olduğumuz İktisadi İşbirliği ve Kalkınma Teşkilatı'nın kuruluşunun 60. yıl dönümünü tebrik ediyorum. Türkiye olarak dengeli ekonomik büyümeyle kalkınmanın temini, refah ve istihdamın artırılması hedefleri doğrultusunda OECD'de etkin bir işbirliği ve dayanışma sergiliyoruz. Teşkilat 60 yıldır hazırladığı anlaşmalar ve sözleşmelerle, iyi uygulama örnekleriyle, oluşturduğu standartlarla, paylaştığı tavsiye ve istatistiki tahlillerle küresel ekonomide önemli bir aktör olduğunu kanıtlamıştır. Covid-19 salgını ne kadar kırılgan bir dünyada yaşadığımızı ve esasen birbirimizle ne kadar bağlı olduğumuzu bir kez daha göstermiştir. Türkiye olarak bu dönemde insanımızın sağlığı için gereken tüm tedbirleri alırken ekonomik faaliyetlerimizi aksatmamak için çaba harcadık. Ekonomik istikrar kalkanı ve sosyal koruma kalkanı paketleriyle girişimcimizin, esnafımızın, dezavantajlı kesimlerin yanında olduk. Salgın şartlarına rağmen hem kamu kuruluşlarımız hem özel sektörümüz yatırımlarını artırarak sürdürüyor. Küresel sorumluluk bilinciyle uluslararası yardımlaşma ve dayanışmayı da asla ihmal etmiyoruz. Türkiye olarak şimdiye kadar 156 ülke, 9 uluslararası kuruluşa yardım sağladık. Kriz halinde hayata geçirilen bu işbirliği ve dayanışmanın kalıcı olmasını temenni ediyorum. Kasım ayının sonunda tertiplenen çevrim içi G20 liderler zirvesinde de değindiğim üzere uluslararası işbirliği gelişmekte olan ülkeler ile mülteciler ve yerlerinden edilmiş kişileri önceleyerek yürütülmelidir. Bu konuda OECD'nin öncü bir rol oynaması gerektiğine inanıyorum. Sayın Genel Sekreteri hizmet döneminde teşkilata etkin şekilde yön verip üye ülkeleri ortak çalışma anlayışıyla mutabakata sevk ettiği için tebrik ediyorum. Bu vesileyle etkinliğin icrasında emeği geçenlere teşekkür ediyor. Sizleri bir kez daha saygıyla selamlıyorum.
Thank you to our leaders for those recorded comments. We have plenty more to come. If I could invite everyone to retake their seats, please. The next leaders panel, the second leaders panel, is ready to go. The case for collective action, the need for greater international cooperation in response to the COVID crisis and the recovery efforts. Of course, it's something we touched on in our first panel, but if the first one touched on the what should recovery look like, what should guide it, then this one covers more the how. How can the multilateral system help countries rebuild their economies in the post-COVID world? The effective distribution of vaccines, restoring mobility, reigniting trade and investment, dealing with enormous levels of debt, etc., etc. I am delighted to welcome three panelists to this panel. Leaders from three open economies, arguably those economies, relatively smaller economies that benefit most from international cooperation and are most committed to it. Carlos Alvarado is president of Costa Rica. Egits Levits is the president of Latvia. And Gitanas Nausėda is the president of Lithuania. Welcome to all of you. President Alvarado, let me start with you. I wonder how hopeful you are that this context will help us see a swing away from this sort of fierce unilateralism that we've seen to a more collaborative approach. After all, if it can't happen in this context, when can it happen?
Thank you very much, and greetings to presidents of Latvia and Lithuania, and also congratulations to the OCDE on the 60th anniversary, which we are very happy to be joining the organization in this period. Well, I'm very hopeful of what's to come. Crisis we need to take advantage of. And I see a rebirth of multilateralism at this point. But we need to aim that rebirth or born again in terms of, for example, for emerging economies. As we need seen for the world to end up with the pandemic and a vaccine for everybody as a public good, we will also be needing financing at very good conditions, especially for emerging economies because of the high debt levels that countries had acquired. We have presented an initiative called FACE, Fund to alleviate the COVID economics, because if not, we're going to have the vaccine for protecting citizens, but we're not going to have a vaccine for protecting economies. But I see the possibilities in multilateralism to do that, also in terms of climate change, also in terms of social inclusion. The pandemic has widened the gap within the countries and between the countries on inequalities. So multilateralism has to tackle those inequalities as well. And now it's time to act. Now it's time to put those mechanisms into place, and the role of developed countries and the role of leadership in developed countries is needed for that to happen, and also in emerging economies calling up for action as well.
President Alvarado, thank you very much indeed. President Levits, a similar question to you. Latvia, I believe, is running for a seat on the UN Security Council in the 2025 election. So reflections on multilateralism at this stage, important from you in Latvia. Give us your overall thoughts and the extent to which you think we can move back to a more collaborative system.
Yes. Thank you. First of all, I would like to thank Secretary General Gurria for your 14 years of leadership. And during this time, the importance of OECD has grown enormously. Latvia has joined OECD 4 years ago, and we benefited also very much from our membership, from the expertise of OECD. I would like to stress two areas which are very important for especially developing countries. Good governance and good administration. And exactly in these fields, OECD provides a very good and practicable expertise. And I see already as a result, especially in developing countries. So concerning multilateralism, I would say that there is no alternative or no good alternative for multilateralism. Because the biggest countries are not big enough in order to solve the global problems and to pursue their own interests unilaterally. Climate change problem and pandemic are very good examples for that. Also, we need a good functioning multilateralism. Multilateralism means a behavior, a mode of or a regime of behavior between the states, but not only between the states, also between societies and also big companies and the citizens. But and this is important in order to create a well-functioning environment for the states. Multilateralism is in principle the consequence from the fact that in the world there exists so more or less 200 countries, 200 states, and multilateralism is a mode of behavior between them. And it can function good or not so good or bad. And we are all interested in order to have a good functioning. I would stress three principles for good functioning of multilateralism. It's respect for international law. It's the absolute basic. Respect for international law. If someone is interfering in international law infringed, then of course multilateralism suffers and it creates conflicts. The second is justice, just behavior. A feeling of injustice is in most cases a source for conflicts, including armed conflicts, but in conflicts in general. Also just behavior. And I know that it's very, very difficult in concrete case to find the just behavior, just politics, but it is possible, and this is a key issue for functioning of multilateralism. And of course, the third principle, respect for human rights. Also, international law, justice, and human rights. Latvia is technologically a very advanced country, and we are flexible, and our Latvian reaction to the pandemic shows that we can adapt to the new situations very quickly. But I would say that the technological and digital revolution in the world, it's a big challenge also for multilateralism. And in order that this challenge could be solved successfully, we need standards. Because it's a new development without standards or with weak standards, and in order to promote the digital technology and also to minimize the risks which is created by digital technology. Yep. And we need legal standards, we need ethical standards, we need standards on international level, we need standards on European level, we need standards on national level. Yep. And Latvia, I would say that it's very ready. We have thought about much on these issues. We are ready to work together with all other countries within the European Union, in the world also. It would be one of the topics when we get a seat. Get a seat in Security Council to develop and to promote international standards in the digital technology, internet, and so on. So I think we have already good projects, and together with other states, we will pursue them.
Okay, President Levits, thank you very much indeed. President Nausėda, in Lithuania, has this, just some overall thoughts first, whether you feel this crisis has, in a sense, revitalized or revalidated globalization, that this is something we need really now to take opportunity of? President Nausėda, we're having a little bit of problem with your... Okay. There you go.
I think now it's okay, yes?
Yep, the famous mute button.
Yes. Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, there is a well-known saying that one should not let a crisis go to waste. The difficult experience of tackling with COVID globally suggests some valuable lessons. We have seen the harmful effects of uncoordinated closing of borders, fragility of supply chains, distortions of trade. All of this proves that even stronger global cooperation and solidarity are needed. And it must be based on the open and transparent dialogue that is only possible through multilateralism. The pressing challenges that we face are global. And I am talking not only about COVID. Climate change is another obvious example. The OECD role is critical in shaping the world's economic recovery towards inclusive, greener, and resilient growth. Even more, some of the businesses have long forgotten national borders. Digital transformation makes borders somehow obsolete. So our common policies need to respond to that, including digital tax, human-centric standards for artificial intelligence, and many others. It is natural for the OECD and other international organizations to be central in finding common ground on various such topics. This underscores the OECD prime role in promoting multilateralism, free trade, and ensuring a global level playing field and transparency. I would like to conclude by saying that we now have an unprecedented opportunity to ensure that our recovery is digital, green, innovative, and fair. All of these four elements are equally challenging and equally necessary. COVID has demonstrated that digitalization can be faster than initially thought. For example, Lithuania managed to switch to fully remote education in just 2 weeks this past spring. This unprecedented public support schemes and upcoming investments can be a catalyst for green transformation. Innovation is the pace which makes all that possible. Last but not least is our responsibility to make sure that the benefits of recovery and growth are shared with the society at large. Otherwise, economic transformation cannot be called a success. This is the ambition I have raised for Lithuania. Yep. And this is ambition I am committed to promote at the multilateral scene.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much indeed, President Nausėda. President Alvarado, let me bring you back in. You touched on developing nations. How concerned are you that developing nations are not left out in the cold? How can OECD members help developing countries promote a truly global recovery? And a third part of that question, when are we going to see Costa Rica become a full member of the OECD?
Well, I'm very much concerned, actually. Why? Because you can see it on the debt levels of the emerging economies. The fiscal margin of the emerging economies is not as large as the margin of such countries like Europe or United States of developed countries. So the impact we're going to see, it's not only currently happened, but it's going to be undergoing for next year. And the thing is, if we don't have a response there, the recovery, not only for emerging economies, but the world as a whole, is going to slow down. As we have such an integrated economy worldwide, the developed countries going to see the impacts of the slowdown of the recovery of the emerging economies. So it's in the interest of everybody that we have global solutions, also for commerce and for trade. In terms of Costa Rica becoming a member, we are on the final part of it. Currently, the bill has been approved in Congress, is going on the revision on the constitutional courts, and we expect by mid-January to have the second debate and to deposit the treaty on the OCDE to complete the whole process by the end of perhaps January, if not mid-February, and that's the times we are aiming at.
Okay, President Alvarado, thank you very much indeed. President Levits, we again back to unity. It's something I put to President von der Leyen and a number of the other leaders earlier today. In Europe, given the budget deal, given the climate target agreement, on the face of things, things look pretty rosy. How united is the European bloc really?
Of course, European Union is a union of 27 member states, and to get a common solution, common result, it's necessary to have discussions. It's a democratic process. But because we have common goals, and all member states are approaching the common goal, and there are maybe different ways, and during the negotiation process we are coming to results. I think it's, if only one member state could take the decisions, it will be faster. But 27 member states, when they are decided something, then it's of course more effective as 27 member states or 27 states alone. And I think we should see that it's a very serious process, and we cannot from the beginning be united. Only in the process of negotiations we are coming closer, and then at the end European Union is a master of compromises.
Yes, indeed.
And, during the whole history of the European Union, I think it's one of the strengths points of the union. Have a compromise.
Apologies for interrupting. We're very pushed for time here. Just a quick final question to President Oecd, and then one more to President Alvarado. Just a quick follow-up on the big tech, on the technology, on the digital piece, President Oecd. I wonder to what extent you feel big technology, big tech is a threat. You know, perhaps one of the biggest threats to the nation state, given the communities they are building up online, given the currencies that they are creating, given the world that big technology is creating. How careful do we need to be?
Thank you very much. This question comes quite often, and I would say that technologies, artificial intelligence, have much more potential than the risks. Of course, we have to think about possible legal environment, about the problems that could arise. But I think that together we all can solve this problem. And for example, my colleague, President Levits, mentioned European Union format. Digitalization is very high on the agenda of European Union, and those 27 members try to find a common denominator, how to solve these issues. And putting together digitalization, green economy, and other issues are extremely important, and knowing all the problems and all the risks, we must try to go forward. Otherwise, we will lose our competitiveness, and European Union cannot allow to do that.
President Oecd, thank you very much indeed. Final question to you, President Alvarado. We can't leave out or gloss over the strides, the great strides that Costa Rica have made in climate and biodiversity protection. What can the world learn from Costa Rica here?
Well, our effort is to lead by example. That means leading by doing. We are part of the high ambition coalition with France. We need to protect as a movement, more than 30% of the land coverage and also 30% of the oceans in order to reach the goals of climate change. So we are aiming on that and we're pushing on that direction. And also, similar to the pandemic, climate change is something we need to tackle globally as multilateralism. At the same time, we are addressing the pandemic and the economic effects and the job effects. For example, in Central America, we were hit by 2 hurricanes, which are part of the extreme weathers we are seeing. And those hurricanes are going to affect agriculture, are going to affect migrations, are going to have several effects that we need to tackle together. So in climate change, our approach is lead by example. We have a decarbonization plan. We launched it in 2019. And also we're moving with several initiatives that we're going to be trying to close on the COP in Glasgow. But action, I believe, in every field is what it's required. We need to push for action, yep. And present those results in these kinds of forums, because that's the only thing that's going to make the difference.
Absolutely.
Action.
Okay, look, I apologize that I have to end this so suddenly, but many, many thanks to President Alvarado, President Levits, and President Nauseida for your insights and your thoughts today. Thank you very much indeed to all of you. Just before we move on to our third and final panel that addresses specifically the role of the OECD, I'd like to introduce the second set of pre-recorded video messages from leaders unable to join in person today. We start with Prime Minister Antonio Costa from Portugal.
Depuis 60 ans, l'OCDE soutient nos pays dans la mise en œuvre de politiques destinées à promouvoir la croissance économique, la création d'emplois, le bien-être et la justice sociale. Le Portugal est un pays fondateur. Nous avons parcouru ces chemins communs avec enthousiasme au long de ces 6 décennies. Nous l'avons fait parce que nous soutenons un réseau multilatéral fort, mais aussi parce que nous pensons bénéficier de l'action, des données et des analyses de l'OCDE pour définir des politiques publiques plus justes et plus efficaces. L'OCDE n'a jamais été aussi importante qu'aujourd'hui, pour une raison essentielle. Jamais, depuis la Seconde Guerre mondiale, nos économies n'ont fait face à des défis de cette ampleur. Jamais, au cours de ces 60 dernières années, nous avons eu un événement aussi bouleversant que celui que nous vivons. Les défis auxquels nos politiques publiques sont confrontées sont sans précédent. Et pour les nouveaux problèmes, nous avons besoin de nouvelles solutions. Nous devons reconstruire un mieux, avoir des sociétés plus fortes, plus inclusives, plus soutenables, plus équitables et plus numériques. L'OCDE a un rôle unique à jouer dans ces processus en tant que forum pour l'apprentissage entre pairs, le partage pour mieux apprendre, apprendre à se développer dans des domaines aussi divers que les politiques économiques ou fiscales, de l'éducation à l'environnement et au changement climatique, des systèmes de retraite et de tourisme, à l'économie bleue et au potentiel de l'océan. Le Portugal défend une OCDE ouverte sur le monde, trouvant la plénitude de sa raison d'être dans le dialogue avec les autres. C'est pourquoi nous soutenons le dialogue avec l'Amérique latine et les Caraïbes, ainsi que l'engagement avec des régions aussi pertinentes que l'Afrique du Nord et le Moyen-Orient ou l'Europe du Sud-Est. Par conséquent, nous défendons de même le renforcement du dialogue avec l'Afrique, seul continent absent de la table du Conseil. Et enfin, nous croyons également aux potentialités de l'élargissement aux 6 candidats qui attendent depuis 2017. L'OCDE est un normalisateur à l'échelle mondiale. À l'heure où le monde est confronté à des profondes transformations des systèmes économiques de production, de transaction, l'OCDE sera à nouveau en mesure de jouer un rôle innovant en fixant les normes équitables et en inspirant les consensus, notamment en ce qui concerne la fiscalité de l'économie numérique. Fiers du passé de notre organisation, nous célébrons aussi l'avenir de l'OCDE, un avenir dans lequel l'OCDE continuera de nous aider à créer des économies plus prospères et des sociétés plus justes.
Monsieur le Président, President Sanchez, Secretary General Gurria, it's a great honour on behalf of the people of Ireland to join this commemoration of the signing of the OECD Convention, saluting 6 decades of OECD endeavour and achievement. Ireland is proud to have been part of the OECD story from the beginning. These 6 decades have also been the story of our own economic and social transformation and Ireland's emergence as a modern, open economy deeply embedded in 21st century networks of global economic cooperation. Among the most important milestones in the history of Irish public policy development is the introduction of free second-level education in the late 1960s. The path was set by the Investment in Education report produced by the OECD in 1965, described as one of the foundation documents of modern Irish education by the late John Coonahan, probably our most distinguished education policy expert. The Ireland-OECD relationship, therefore, had an extremely strong start, and we continue to hold OECD advice and expertise in the very highest regard. It is no exaggeration to say that it remains the benchmark for intelligent policy making. Nor is it an exaggeration to say that the unique role played by the OECD in the multilateral system has never been more important. The ongoing efforts towards reaching a multilateral consensus-based solution to the tax challenges of digitalisation is an excellent example of this unique role, and I look forward to seeing this work brought to a successful conclusion in the middle of next year. The OECD draws on many strengths and values. Its member states share a commitment to democracy, human rights and the rule of law, and it is these shared strengths and values that underpin the well-earned trust we place in the OECD's authority and objectivity. Under Secretary-General Gurria, the OECD has shown remarkable resilience and leadership, including in the context of the devastation caused by the COVID-19 pandemic. I have every confidence that it will continue to play a crucial role in helping member governments navigate the unprecedented challenges and opportunities of the 21st century. Bonne chance pour l'avenir et merci beaucoup.
Excellences, Mesdames et Messieurs, 60 ans, jour pour jour, après la naissance de l'OCDE, nous mesurons son chemin parcouru pour promouvoir le multilatéralisme, le développement économique, l'égalité des genres, l'aide au développement des économies émergentes et son attachement à l'état de droit et de la démocratie. L'OCDE s'est adaptée pour relever les défis de son temps. Sous votre conduite, Monsieur le Secrétaire général, elle a pris à bras-le-corps les nouveaux enjeux liés à la digitalisation de l'économie, l'enseignement, l'emploi, la lutte contre les inégalités. Il est à présent impératif de nous pencher sur l'après-Covid et réinventer notre société. Sur le plan social, il importe de renforcer la cohésion entre toutes les catégories de la population, tout en permettant aux plus vulnérables de trouver leur place dans la société. Nous ne pouvons plus ignorer les déséquilibres entre hommes et femmes, exacerbés par Covid-19, tant sur le plan économique qu'au niveau des violences faites aux femmes. Nous devons développer de nouvelles opportunités pour les personnes les plus vulnérables, développer les synergies entre l'enseignement et le monde du travail, réinventer notre façon de travailler, notamment au vu de nouvelles opportunités liées aux nouvelles technologies. Les mesures de protection sociale mises en place par la Belgique ont permis de limiter partiellement la fracture sociale. Certaines devront être prolongées en vue d'une reprise durable de la vie socio-économique et de la croissance. Sur le plan économique, la population souhaite une économie plus durable, équitable, adaptée aux défis de notre monde et axée sur le respect de l'environnement. Les accords de Paris doivent notamment nous guider dans ce sens. Face à la pandémie, Un multilatéralisme économique doit faire partie de la solution. L'OCDE doit jouer le rôle de guide dans l'élaboration d'un canevas grâce à ses critères d'analyse, ses guides de bonnes pratiques et ses recommandations. Elle doit venir en appui des gouvernements pour les aider à rétablir leur tissu socio-économique. Excellences, Mesdames et Messieurs, plus que jamais, la situation recommande que nous trouvions ensemble une réponse adaptée à cette pandémie qui a un impact sans précédent pour nos populations. Cette réponse doit inclure une réflexion sur notre façon d'envisager l'avenir. Puisse l'OCDE continuer à être le standard international dans les domaines où elle excelle, tout en continuant à se réinventer et s'adapter aux circonstances du moment pendant au moins les 60 prochaines années.
Sehr geehrter Herr Generalsekretär, sehr geehrter Herr Präsident Macron, sehr geehrter Herr Ministerpräsident Sanchez, sehr geehrte Damen und Herren. Fundierte Analysen können wie Alarmglocken wirken. Sie warnen, wenn Gefahr droht und entschiedenes Handeln notwendig ist. In Deutschland hat eine OECD-Vergleichsstudie vor mehreren Jahren eine derart alarmierende Wirkung entfaltet. Sie ist in unseren Sprachschatz als PISA-Schock eingegangen, der einen heilsamen Anstoß zur Neuausrichtung unserer Bildungspolitik gab. Sich internationalen Vergleichen zu stellen, ist bisweilen unangenehm, aber erweist sich oft als lehrreich. Vor allem das macht die OECD zu einem unschätzbaren Partner in der Politik und maßgebenden Akteur in der internationalen Zusammenarbeit. Ob Bildungspolitik, ob Wirtschafts-, Umwelt- oder Sozialpolitik, das Aufgabenspektrum der OECD ist im Grunde so vielfältig wie die Globalisierung selbst. Seit ihrer Gründung vor 60 Jahren gilt für die OECD kein geringerer Maßstab als eine bessere Politik für ein besseres Leben. Dazu drängt sie als politischer Ratgeber. Dazu dient sie als Wegbereiter für internationale Standards. Und dazu gibt sie Impulse als Wissensplattform, die Best-Practice-Vergleiche erlaubt. Wie wichtig dies ist, zeigt sich nicht zuletzt mit Blick auf die Covid-19-Pandemie und ihre Folgen. Welche Schlüsse auch immer jedes einzelne Land aus einem umfassenden Erfahrungs- und Wissensaustausch zieht, fest steht, gemeinsame Herausforderungen lassen sich auch nur gemeinsam am besten bewältigen. Dafür steht die OECD. Dafür macht sie sich seit 60 Jahren stark. Dafür verdient sie unser aller Dank. Ich gratuliere herzlich zu diesem Jubiläum.
All right, on to our final panel of the day, the global role of the OECD, with messages from the previous two panels firmly in mind. We now have got an opportunity to take a closer look at the OECD's role in driving important multilateral initiatives, including on digital taxation, inclusive growth, and the environment. This is a discussion between the OECD Secretary General and two countries with whom the organization has worked extremely closely, in particular as they emerged from the global financial crisis. I'm delighted to welcome Katrín Jakobsdóttir, the Prime Minister of Iceland, and Kyriakos Mitsotakis, the Prime Minister of Greece, and Mr. Gouria joins me here on the stage. Prime Minister Jakobsdóttir, let me start with you. I mentioned the financial crisis in my introduction. How important a steward has the OECD been for Iceland? Prime Minister, we can't hear you. I think the mute button might be on.
Thank you.
There you go. We can hear you now.
Thank you. Perfect. Well, OECD has been a very valuable partner for Iceland, actually, during this crisis and many before. And I think what we are seeing now, what the OECD has actually done, is that they have put emphasis on very important issues for Iceland, such as the importance of income equality and its relation with prosperity. We are actually now a part of a network called Wellbeing Economies and Wellbeing Governments, trying to really focus on how we can increase equality in our societies to increase well-being. I think a very important role also for the OECD now is, because we're all talking about how to build back greener and better and how to really tackle the climate crisis, because we've been just overwhelmed by the COVID pandemic in the last few months. And it is my firm conviction that the OECD will have a very important role in giving us advice on how to build back our economies in a greener way, so we can actually tackle the climate crisis at the same time. This will be quite a big challenge, and probably the biggest challenge we're facing. And then I would like also to mention the digital transformation that all our societies are going through. And it's so important really that we do that in a just way, a fair way, so we ensure that the digital transformation will not increase inequalities and will also be a very important part of our prosperity. So I would just like to mention those three topics. I think the OECD has played and will play a very important role for its members.
Okay, Prime Minister, thank you very much indeed. Prime Minister Mitsotakis, a similar question for you. Give us a sense of what the stewardship offered Greece and the extent to which the road to recovery is down to that stewardship.
Well, first of all, let me thank Secretary General Gurria for his leadership, for his passion, and for everything that he has contributed to the OECD. I've had a chance to work with him very closely, not just as a prime minister, but also as a minister in charge of administrative reform. One of the projects that we ran with the OECD was a systematic assessment of the administrative burdens that we needed to eliminate in order to make our economy more competitive and our public administration more effective. This is just one example of the work that we've done with the OECD over the past 10 years. As you know, the last decade was not particularly successful for the country, and we frequently relied on OECD stewardship on various projects where we felt that we could benefit from best practices, but also, a fresh look regarding how we need to address major challenges that we were facing. Let me just highlight two additional examples of work that we've done with the OECD. The first had to do with opening up our products markets and how we're going to make them more competitive. And the second, which I think was of particular importance, had to do with promoting transparent and accountable government. We have actually set up a national transparency authority. Interestingly enough, it is being led. Its first director of the agency is a Greek civil servant who has been trained at the OECD and has run various projects of a similar nature in many other countries. This is just one example of how we can actually use the OECD expertise within our own administrative priorities. And
okay,
of course,
thank you. Go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead.
I was going to come back very quickly and throw it forward to both of you very quickly, one after the other, and then I'll come to Mr. Gurria. To Prime Minister Jakobsdottir first, you mentioned green, you mentioned digital. What do you think are the most pressing challenges right now going forward that the OECD can help you with? And we talk about the OECD being bold, being more daring than it's ever been. Is it bold enough? Is it daring enough in your mind?
Well, I think actually the OECD has been quite bold in the past when we talk about transparency issues, for example. And I would just like to mention one thing that has been very important for a small country like ours, which is the BEPS project, the Base Erosion and Profit Shifting Framework, because this is one of the big challenges, which is really to ensure that everybody pays its fair share of our taxes and that we are all really playing on the same field when it comes to tax payments. So that's one very good example. What I think that the OECD could do more of is really focusing more on the climate issue when it comes to the economic recovery, because there we are going to face a lot of dilemmas between building up fast and building up old style economies. What we need to do, however, is to build up more innovation and do it in a more sustainable way, and to ensure that building back the economy supports our climate goals. And this is on the top of my mind, because we were talking about it this weekend, actually, at the UN meeting on Saturday. And I think the OECD will prove to be, could have a vital could have the importance of OECD could be vital when it comes to this issue.
Okay, thank you. Prime Minister Mitsotakis, very quickly to you. I hate this role sometimes of playing devil's advocate here and playing the skeptic or the cynic. What do you feel the OECD could do better?
Well, I would echo what the Prime Minister of Iceland said. Building back better means doing things differently. So in the post-COVID era, maybe some of the preconceptions, some of the ideas that were sort of enshrined in the OECD way of doing business need to be reevaluated. But I would add two more thematic areas where I would like the OECD to do even more work. They've been extremely systematic, but they're extremely important for us. The one is the nexus between education, skills, and the digital economy. And of course, the second is how do we reduce inequalities, and what COVID has taught us about the dignity of work and about making sure that some of the low-paying jobs in our economies are actually properly rewarded. We all understood their importance during the COVID epidemic.
Okay, thank you very much. Very useful. Well, let's put those now to the Secretary-General. Let me start, though, the Secretary-General, with this question to you. How daring are you prepared to be now, given what we're seeing? How willing are you prepared to be to think out of the box, to try new things as an organization?
In 2008, 2009, we were confronted with a situation of crisis, totally unexpected. Suddenly, growth came to a standstill, and we had to take a hard look. We had to see what was going on and be bold and be daring. The problem that we have today, as compared to 2008, 2009, is that then we knew how much it took to rescue General Motors. We knew how much it took to pay the creditors of Lehman Brothers. Okay. And the question was, are the countries willing to pay or not? Are the countries willing to pay to save the world from uncertainty, financial uncertainty, and get the banking system stable, etc.? Today, the problem is it's still going on. And 12 trillion later, it's still going on. The numbers are still flaring in a number of countries, including OECD countries. And thank God we've been lucky in Africa, but not so much in Latin America. You know the numbers. So what I'm saying is we still cannot calculate the whole of the damage. And how daring are we prepared to be? As daring as necessary. The question is, we've said again and again, choosing between lives and livelihoods is a false dilemma. What you have to do is throw everything you got and the kitchen sink, at the virus. Beat the virus, kill the virus, control the virus, including with the vaccines, but also by proper social conduct. Because then, if we shorten the life of the virus or the damage that the virus is doing, we will be able to pay a lower economic price, a lower social price, a lower governance price, a lower environmental price.
We heard many leaders, presidents and prime ministers, talk this morning and lay out their thoughts. What do you want to see? I mean, you mentioned fight the virus, but what do you want to see more of? Concrete action from Greece, from Iceland, from France, from Spain, from Lithuania, from Latvia?
We are at a stage in which the existence of the vaccine has changed the game, if you will. Because even the stock market, in this very, very interesting and sometimes difficult to understand reaction, the stock market went just through the roof. Why? Because the expectation that the vaccine was already there. Although we are calculating that the whole of 2021 is going to be a year in which we're mostly going to have to be living with the virus, and that we're only going to be able to deploy and distribute and provide the benefits of the 2 jabs of the vaccine towards the 3rd quarter, perhaps towards the end of the year. So, again, when we're talking about building back, as the Prime Minister of Iceland was saying, I mean, building back better. What does it mean? It means that we cannot rebuild the economy on the basis of the level of consumption of fossil fuels. And frankly, let's stop doing damage ourselves. We now produce more subsidies for fossil fuels than we invest. And that's the governments, that we invest in the defense of the planet, of the environment. And when it comes to biodiversity, for example, 7-8 times more subsidies that are harmful to biodiversity than the ones that we are investing in favor of biodiversity. So basically what we're saying is, let's stop doing harm to ourselves, because we cannot be undoing with one hand what we're doing so strenuously with the other. And when we're saying again and again and again, so we're doing this knowingly, we're doing this with full knowledge of the consequences. And the other one was, you know, the Prime Minister of Greece mentioned competition.
Yeah.
And they mentioned also, you know, public administration at large. This is some of the work that we're doing all the time for the new, for the more sustainable world, for the greener world, for the more inclusive world. What were the problems that we had before? We left too many people behind. And Greece was struggling all the time with the question of leaving too many people behind. And this is what the Prime Minister has now addressed in his mandate, that we should not leave people behind, because they are going to be the object and the subject of further problems.
Secretary General, thank you. Prime Minister Jakob Startier, as we come out of this crisis slowly, and we've talked about some of the other challenges, what benefits from OECD membership do you think you will value the most?
Well, of course, I'm just an adamant spokesperson for multilateral cooperation, and for a small country like Iceland, this really matters, because what the OECD has given us is quite a lot of resources and knowledge and know-how, which is important for a small country like ours. But I would also like to add, because we haven't mentioned it, and the General Secretary was talking about the importance of leaving no one behind. And one lesson that we can derive from the pandemic is really the fact that the main responsibility of the work that's being done to treat patients and work in the pandemic is being done by women, even though the majority of decisions is being made by men. And I think this has really shown us the importance of a very strong health system with equal access for everybody, but also underlined the importance of work of women. And I think when it comes to also building back better, as Mr. Gurria mentions, then we also need to think about building back with more equality and more gender equality. And if we have ever seen the importance of the work of women, it's in this pandemic.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you very much indeed. Prime Minister Mitsotakis, building back better, what's the most essential ingredient that you will receive from a steward like the OECD?
The OECD has been and will continue to be, a vast, repository of data, of best practices. And as a government that is certainly looking towards implementing bold, transformative moves rather than incremental changes, we're very much interested in the sort of best practices that we could use when we think about, building back better, but a completely different future and a completely different growth path. I fully share what the Secretary General said we can no longer rely as much on consumption. And of course, the twin priorities of a green and a digital transformation have been enshrined in the mandate that this government has received. We now have the additional benefit of having significant European funds through the Recovery and Resilience Fund to support these policies. So the bolder the examples and the best practices that the OECD could share with us, the more interested we will be.
Yeah, and Prime Minister, give us your thoughts quickly on what we've just heard from Prime Minister Jakobsdottir on the gender piece, on the equality piece. We spoke to Prime Minister Erdogan about this and others as well this morning. How critical is it, and what are we seeing in your country?
It is absolutely critical, and frankly, we haven't made as much progress as I would like on this front. It is an ongoing struggle. We still have relatively low women participation in the labor force. It is an issue that we need to address. We do not have as much political representation as I would like. It is changing, but it is changing in a slow manner. At least we have our first president of the Hellenic Republic, who's female. I was very proud to propose her, and she was elected by Parliament. So we should not forget that big social changes also need to go hand in hand with the big economic reforms that we envision, and certainly gender equality on all fronts. Real gender equality is absolutely critical. Sometimes it's a small changes. For example, what do you do with preschool education? How do we, allow women who would spend time taking care of young children actually go out to work? That make the biggest difference when it comes to these sorts of policies.
Okay. Many thanks. Look, Secretary General, I want to give the final word to you on this subject, the OECD and where it goes. What's your advice? Actually, let me first ask you this: what qualities would you like to see in a new Secretary General?
Leadership, transparency, evidence-based, but also there are very immediate tasks. The more immediate task, the more, urgent task is obviously to deal with the question of COVID-19, because it's having all these health and all these economic and all these social impacts. But remember, the single most important intergenerational responsibility is to protect the planet. And therefore, the question is not to lose the sight of the medium and long-term issues, because we are so held up and so occupied and so preoccupied with fighting the immediate battle against COVID. So I would say that the next Secretary General or anybody who has responsibility in the different areas in which we are working would have to make very clear discrimination of what it is that we have to do, what we are expected to do, for Iceland, what we are expected to do for Greece, in order to help the countries with the best practices fight the COVID, fight the pandemic, and then fight the consequences of the pandemic, because the consequences will be here a lot longer than the pandemic itself. And then, again, not lose track of the fundamentals of the things of the new world that we have to build going forward.
And very quickly, a little cheeky perhaps, any other tips for this person as he or she moves into the chateau and sits at your desk?
I've been here almost 15 years, and every day I learn something more, or several things. And I am in awe of the OECD and the knowledge that it generates, and the knowledge that the interaction between the experts of the OECD and the governments generate, and how we are advancing policies. Remember, our motto is better policies for better lives. Every day, not only do I learn something, but as I say, I'm surprised. I'm in awe of this capacity. And why? Because it's multilateral. It's multilateral. Because how are you going to deal with trade? How are you going to deal with investment? How are you going to deal with climate change, with biodiversity? How are you going to deal with migration? How are you going to deal with this pandemic, if not multilaterally?
Secretary General, thank you very much indeed for those thoughts. I also want to thank Prime Minister Jakobsdóttir of Iceland, Prime Minister Mitsotakis of Greece for your thoughts as well. Thank you very much indeed to both of you for joining us today. Secretary General, I'm going to stand up for this bit. They're asking me to stand up for this bit. Just before we continue with some pre-recorded messages, I'd like to invite you to share your closing thoughts, given what you've heard today from so many leaders across the globe. At the start, I said, look, the sheer number of participants, of leaders, of prime ministers, of presidents is testament to just how important and significant this event is. You have clearly been a huge, huge part of that, as you said, for many, many years. Secretary General Gurria, let's hear your final thoughts, please.
My final thoughts are with the men and women who have made the OECD what it is today. My final thoughts are with all the members of the OECD throughout the years and the ones today, and hopefully the ones that have also requested their membership and which we have kept waiting now almost 4 years, that we should in the next few months answer their requests. But at the same time, I would say face the situations, have this capacity to face the situations. We never saw 2008, 2009 coming. And I saw that as a failure. So we created the new approaches to economic challenges. I always said, you know, in the beginning, I had to present in Oslo a big fat book about biodiversity, and I was not so familiar with the subject. I was a finance minister, after all, a foreign minister. And in order to prove my credentials, I coined a phrase to say, we are on a collision course with nature, and we have to change course. You were a witness in many of the cases that I mentioned this. Well, the problem is we still are. So that's also a very dire and sobering way to remind us that some of these challenges don't go away too fast, and at the same time that it's only through cooperation, through collaboration among countries and with international organizations that we're going to get there.
Okay, very good. Is there anything final you want to say from the lectern?
No,
or that
absolutely.
is it?
No, this is the. I have a very serious cases of overexposure today, so I can no.
Effective communication, I think, is the key to this. Thank you.
Thank you very much,
Angel Gurria,
thank you,
Secretary General of the OECD. It's been a pleasure today, and it's been a pleasure over the years as well.
Thank you.
Working with you,
Okay.
Angel Gurria. Right, as the Secretary General leaves, the panel discussions are over, but we still do have many, many voices to hear. And there are some wonderful little videos coming now. In the next videos, we're going to hear from the leaders of countries that joined the OECD from the start or during the 60s, among them Japan and Finland, the first countries to join the group of founding members of the old OEEC, plus Canada and the US. Let's roll those videos.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, at a time when science is being questioned and challenged, the OECD remains a beacon of trust and wisdom, as it has been for the past 60 years. To Sweden and many governments around the world, the work of the OECD has become crucial for policy shaping in many political fields. As a result, it has placed itself as an important player in the global multilateral system. We need to continue to have an OECD that is impartial in its analysis, flexible when needed, and ready to adapt to global challenges and crises. The current COVID-19 crisis has clearly shown that the OECD is all of that. And I would like to thank Secretary General Gurria and recognize the achievements of the OECD under his leadership not least during the current global health crisis. I would also like to underline how much I value our cooperation regarding the global deal and the OECD hosting a support unit for this important partnership, highlighting the value of social dialogue. Sweden has been a highly committed member of the OECD since it was founded in 1961. We will continue to lend our fullest support to the organization. Thank you.
Monsieur le secrétaire général, Mesdames et Messieurs les chefs d'État et de gouvernement, Mesdames et Messieurs, alors que nous marquons le 60e anniversaire de la Convention de l'OCDE, rappelons-nous combien nos prédécesseurs ont été visionnaires. Le préambule de la Convention précise en effet qu'une coopération plus large constituera une contribution essentielle à des relations pacifiques et harmonieuses entre les peuples. À l'heure de la crise du coronavirus et de la crise climatique, ce besoin de coopération est plus nécessaire que jamais. Nous devons nous assurer que nos modèles économiques et sociaux, au-delà de leurs différences, soient durables et contribuent par conséquent à réduire la pauvreté et les inégalités. La pandémie et ses conséquences ne doivent pas compromettre les acquis dans ces domaines. L'action multilatérale est le moyen le plus efficace pour réaliser les objectifs de développement durable tels que formulés dans l'agenda 2030 et l'accord de Paris sur le climat. La Suisse fait partie des 20 pays fondateurs qui ont créé l'OCDE en 1961. Elle promeut les mêmes valeurs que celles de l'organisation, la démocratie fondée sur l'état de droit et l'adhésion au principe d'une économie sociale de marché ouverte et transparente. C'est pour cela que la Suisse est convaincue que l'OCDE doit demeurer une référence, tant pour les pays membres que pour les pays partenaires, dans la définition des politiques publiques. Forte de cette conviction, la Suisse a décidé de présenter une candidature au poste de secrétaire général de l'organisation. Monsieur le secrétaire général, dans quelques mois, vous quitterez vos fonctions. Grâce à votre impulsion, l'OCDE est devenue une organisation incontournable de la gouvernance économique mondiale. Alors que les politiques budgétaires et monétaires atteignent leurs limites, les politiques structurelles gagnent en importance. L'OCDE a donc un rôle central à jouer pour aider les États membres à concevoir des politiques capables de répondre aux défis de notre temps. La crise actuelle a démontré, une fois de plus, notre interdépendance et l'importance de coopérer. Que le souffle visionnaire et pacifique des fondateurs de l'OCDE continue de porter notre action. Monsieur le secrétaire général, je saisis cette occasion pour vous remercier de votre engagement et vous souhaite le meilleur pour les derniers mois de votre mandat. Je vous remercie.
Excellencies, dear Secretary General, 60 years ago, Austria signed the OECD Convention as one of the founding members. Back then, we committed ourselves to achieving sustainable economic growth and employment while maintaining financial stability. At the same time, we stressed our responsibility to contribute to the development of the global economy. These guiding principles are as valid today as they were 60 years ago. 2020 has been a challenging year. The COVID pandemic has radically changed our societies. At the same time, the crisis has once more shown the value of close international cooperation and a strong international organization like the OECD. At the 60th birthday, there are two important lessons learned. First, we need stronger cooperation among OECD members. With its deep economic analysis, the OECD is playing a key role in making our economies more resilient. Second, the OECD must engage with emerging economies.
Through more cooperation with our partners, we will be able to promote our standards and good practices for the mutual benefit of all, also at global scale. And last but not least, I would like to thank Secretary General for his strong leadership over the past 15 years, which contributed greatly to making the OECD as successful as it is today. Thank you.
Mr. President, Mr. Secretary General, Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. Today, amid this global pandemic, we commemorate the 60th anniversary of the signing of the OECD Convention. First, let me express my gratitude to the French President Emmanuel Macron, to Pedro Sánchez, Chair of the MCM, and of course, Secretary General Gurria. The Netherlands is a proud founding member of the organization, and I'm delighted to say that today, 60 years later, the OECD is more vital and more relevant than ever. The COVID-19 pandemic is first and foremost a public health crisis. But it's also an economic and social crisis, the like of which we haven't seen since the end of the Second World War. Fortunately, there is no light at the end of the tunnel. We can start thinking about the phase after the pandemic. And that phase will be about recovery, which must go hand in hand with more sustainable growth. We can only achieve that if we work together across borders in a framework of constructive multilateralism. And that's exactly what the OECD is all about. The organization has always been a driving force behind the multilateral system that fosters global cooperation. A robust organization that helps to build and maintain a rules-based international system. So, 60 years after the signing of the convention, we can conclude not only that the OECD has achieved a lot over the decades, but also that a lot more work lies ahead. The Netherlands stands ready to play its part. To conclude, I would like to thank you, Angel, for your tremendous contribution to the OECD over the past 14 years. I've greatly appreciated our many personal contacts in that time. Thank you.
Monsieur le secrétaire général, chers collègues et chers amis, je suis désolé de ne pas pouvoir être des vôtres aujourd'hui, car 60 ans, ça se fête. 60 ans d'OCDE, c'est la reconstruction de l'Europe après les ravages de la Seconde Guerre mondiale. C'est la guerre froide, le choc pétrolier, la chute du mur de Berlin, la crise financière de 2008 et maintenant la crise sanitaire. À Paris, on adore se référer à Molière qui écrivait que 60 ans, c'est la fleur de l'âge et le début de la belle saison. Arrivée à maturité, l'OCDE n'est pas prête de prendre sa retraite pour autant. Elle nous manquerait. Elle manquerait au multilatéralisme dont elle est devenue l'un des piliers. L'OCDE a su s'adapter aux nouveaux enjeux. Le changement climatique, la digitalisation, la fiscalité internationale sont autant de défis qu'il faudra prendre à bras le corps. 60 ans d'OCDE, c'est une crédibilité internationale qui n'est plus à faire. La rapidité avec laquelle notre organisation a changé son fusil d'épaule pour répondre à la crise de la Covid, en mettant tout son savoir au service de la relance économique, m'a impressionné. L'OCDE regarde résolument vers l'avenir. Pour mon pays, le Grand-Duché de Luxembourg, pays fondateur de l'OCDE, l'OCDE nous a accompagnés à travers les mutations économiques. La crise de l'acier, à laquelle elle répond en animant aujourd'hui le Forum mondial sur les surcapacités. La naissance de la place financière luxembourgeoise, aujourd'hui un leader de renommée mondiale de la finance climatique et durable qui est gouvernée en grande partie par les règles écrites en ces murs qui nous garantissent un level playing field international. Car c'est là la force principale de l'OCDE, que ce soit la fiscalité, l'industrie, l'aide publique au développement, l'environnement et tant d'autres politiques. L'OCDE n'est pas seulement un centre d'excellence, mais elle diffuse surtout ses standards au niveau mondial et garantit ainsi des règles de jeu équitables pour tous. des règles aussi précieuses pour les économies ouvertes, dont le Luxembourg est l'un des exemples les plus aboutis. Ces 15 dernières années, vous, le secrétaire général, cher Ángel, vous avez laissé une marque indéniable sur l'OCDE. Vous avez rehaussé son statut, sa visibilité, sa pertinence, et je vous remercie du fond du cœur d'avoir si bien su prendre soin de notre organisation. Alors bon anniversaire à l'OCDE et Ángel, même si nos chemins un jour devront se séparer au niveau officiel, l'amitié restera et tu seras toujours le bienvenu au Grand-Duché de Luxembourg.
Dear Secretary General, dear colleagues, the year that is about to end has been marked by one of the most demanding challenges of our time. The international community is facing a pandemic which is unprecedented in the last century, with staggering health and socio-economic impacts. Since its start, we all had to recognize that such an extraordinary challenge needed strong multilateral cooperation and solidarity. As we celebrate today the 60th anniversary of the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, it is clear that ever that we must make international cooperation truly effective, not only to overcome the threat to our health, but also to promote a sustainable, inclusive and resilient social and economic recovery. We have now the opportunity and the responsibility to step up our efforts, building on an increased awareness that stronger multilateralism is necessary to deliver results. A multilateralism based on trust and on international law, and open to new practices and instruments. The European Union is in itself an example of the relevance of international cooperation, and must and will be a driving force in this common endeavor. And Italy is a proud member of the OECD since its foundation. Over the years, the organization has given an essential contribution as a catalyst for international consensus on economic issues and the global standard setter for the promotion of inclusive and sustainable growth policies based on its accurate reports and analysis. Today, its role is still pivotal to contribute to a fair and inclusive economic development for the next generations. And a few days ago, Italy has taken over from Saudi Arabia the important responsibility of the presidency of a G20. People, planet, prosperity are at the center of our commitment. We want to promote a holistic approach based on the sustainability, innovation, equity and solidarity. In the same spirit, we will host in 2021 a Global Health Summit together with the European Commission, and we will be in partnership with the UK for COP26. As a G20 presidency, we look forward to keeping working with the OECD on these priorities, enhancing its ability to translate political inputs into concrete results through its standards, data, analysis, and evidence-based policy recommendations. I wish to congratulate once again the organization for its outstanding work in the last decades and for its remarkable achievements on the benefit of the international community. Thank you very much. Auguri.
日本国内閣総理大臣の菅義偉です。マクロン大統領、サンチェス首相、グリア事務総長、ご出席の皆様、この度、OECD 条約の署名から60周年を迎えることに心よりお祝い申し上げます。OECD は、優れた経済分析や質の高いルール作りを通じて、多角的自由貿易体制の強化や、持続可能な経済成長に大きく貢献してきました。日本はこうした OECD の取り組みを高く評価しています。そして、グローバル化やコロナ危機により、経済社会の在り方に大きな変革が求められている今、世界の英知を結集し、 政策協調を行う OECD の役割がますます高まっています。現在日本は感染拡大を防止し、人々の命と暮らしを守るとともに、デジタル化の推進、グリーン社会の実現といった課題に官民の知恵を集め、社会全体で取り組んでいます。ウィズコロナ、ポストコロナにおいて、これらの取り組みをしっかりと前に進めることこそが産業構造や経済社会の変革をもたらし、大きな成長につながると考えています。日本はこれらの重要課題に取り組む中で、得られた知見を OECD とも共有し、より良い回復に向けた国際的な議論にも積極的に貢献していきます。同時に世界経済における成長センターとしてのアジアの影響力が増す中、我が国は OECD と東南アジアを含むアジア地域との関係強化を今後も後押ししていきます。ご清聴ありがとうございました。
Thank you for this opportunity to greet and to congratulate the OECD and its member states on behalf of Finland on this special day. As we all know, 2020 has been an exceptionally hard year. We also know that the post-COVID-19 world will be different from the world before the pandemic. Certain megatrends have accelerated, such as digitalization, and several global challenges remain critical, especially climate change. Some of the longer-term effects of the COVID crisis still remain to be seen. I strongly believe that every crisis should be seen as an opportunity to evolve, to improve our policies and to become socially, economically and environmentally more sustainable. We must not overlook this opportunity to change and to accelerate the green recovery. As governments, we can choose whether to sit on the passenger seat or to take action. A transformative recovery will not be possible without multilateral cooperation. We need cooperation to agree on common goals and on the sharing of responsibilities. We need cooperation to exchange information about the best ways to tackle the crisis. The OECD is a good forum for this kind of cooperation. This organization has stood the test of time and has provided evidence-based analysis and a platform for peer learning for nearly 60 years. It is quite clear to me that if the OECD did not exist today, we would have to invent it. Finland has been a loyal supporter of OECD's valuable work during our membership over 50 years, and I want to express our gratitude for this cooperation that has helped Finland to become the highly advanced welfare society it is today. I would also like to congratulate Secretary-General Gurria, the Secretariat, as well as all the Member States and the OECD delegations in Paris on this special day, and I wish you all good health. A special thanks to President Macron and to Prime Minister Sanchez for co-hosting this event. The OECD's motto is Better Policies for Better Lives. Perhaps in the times of crisis, our work could aim at building better policies. Thank you, and I wish you all a successful event.
Well, Australia joined in 1971, the same year the OECD created its Environment Department, at a time when most countries didn't even have ministries of the environment. In 1994, Mexico joined as the first emerging economy. With the fall of the Berlin Wall, the 90s saw Central and Eastern European countries join the OECD, as well as NATO and ultimately the EU, a symbol of their transition to democracy and market economy. Korea joined as the second Asian country in 1996. Let's run another batch of videos.
For 60 years, the OECD has proven that better policies produce better lives. Because of your thoughtful and careful research and analysis, the health, the welfare, the education, and the environment of untold millions of people is better. Now, you have achieved this through a set of values that have stood the test of time. Values that are demonstrated by the member states that form the OECD. A shared commitment to democracy, human rights, the rule of law, open, transparent, market-based economic principles. We share that like-mindedness. These are the foundations on which to now respond to one of the greatest challenges that we have seen in generations. The OECD is in a strong position to maximise the strength of a post-COVID economic recovery, to defend and protect and promote the benefits of trade liberalisation, open markets, free trade, to restore a global rules-based order and promote it with its institutions match fit in good working order, to drive and lead ambitious and effective action on climate change, to secure fair international taxation, to support good governance, inclusiveness and innovation through the analysis, advice and standard settings work that you do. In these uncertain times, the OECD's central mission to promote stronger, cleaner, fairer economic growth and to raise employment and living standards is more important than ever. And these are goals that Australia shares and has always lived. It's who we are. Beyond the pandemic, the world faces other pressures. Societies have become increasingly polarised and fractured. Populism and protectionism are gaining footholds, challenging democracy and institutions and open markets. It reminds us of the vital role the OECD plays in providing guidance and leadership. I believe the methodology the OECD has pioneered and continue to develop will help us get to where we all want to be, but more importantly need to be as like-minded countries. The detailed comparative data analysis, the world-class evidence-based policy work, driving member states to do better for their people and enabling and supporting them to do that. The platform it provides for cooperation, the learning from each other, the coordination of policies to deal with the challenges of our time in an open, multilateral, international environment. You know, working together, we know we can achieve a cleaner, more inclusive recovery, which helps economies around the world restore jobs that were lost and generate new jobs that help all. It's so much about jobs. So on behalf of Australia, a very proud member of the OECD, who have always understood its importance and always partnered with the OECD to promote and champion its important work. Happy 60th anniversary, and the world needs so many more from the OECD, particularly at this vital time. Happy anniversary.
Hello, really glad to be with you today as we celebrate the 60th anniversary of the OECD, a really, really important landmark that we celebrate in very, very unusual circumstances. Mexico joined the OECD in 1994, basically at about half-time the life span of the OECD, and at that time we were the very first emerging market economy to join this organization. This was very important in many senses, not only for us, but also because in the mind of the people on the street, the OECD was basically the club of wealthy countries. The OECD has been evolving over the years and is now a leading organization in terms of inclusiveness, fairness, equity, sustainability, etc. This was true over the last few years, but particularly before COVID, probably the most important issue in the international agenda was about how to reach a fair agreement in terms of digital taxation. And the OECD was really the instrumental organization with regards to this matter. This is a task that we still need to close. Just one last message. I'm sure that Jose Angel Gurria doesn't know it, but around 21 years ago when I came back to Mexico and joined as a very, very junior economist the Ministry of Finance, he was the Secretary of Finance at the time, so I gave my very first baby steps as a public servant under his leadership. Jose Angel, felicidades por el 60 aniversario de la OECD y por la gran trayectoria que has hecho enfrente de ella. Thank you.
60 years ago, OECD's founding members agreed to create an organization to develop better policies for improving economic performance. During these 60 years, the world and our economies have changed enormously, making earlier textbook solutions often obsolete. Even so, the OECD has always been able to offer new and sometimes unorthodox policy advice to its members. The success of the organization has been clearly demonstrated by the remarkable economic development of the OECD area and by the steady extension of the organization's membership. OECD's 60th anniversary in 2021 coincides with the 25th anniversary of Hungary's membership. Hungary's accession in 1996 was a positive recognition of a successful and irreversible transformation of a communist political and economic structure into a pluralist parliamentary democracy and a free market economy. OECD's evidence-based analysis and non-political advice have significantly contributed to the development of the Hungarian economy. 10 years ago, Hungary signed OECD's 50th anniversary vision statement in Paris. By that time, we were just recovering from the global financial crisis, and I can recall our confident commitment to OECD's effective role for the future. Today, our economies are struggling with the even more devastating impact of the COVID pandemic. Millions of jobs are at stake. We were facing a double challenge. We simultaneously have to save the lives of our people and keep our economies running. OECD's contribution to help its members develop better policies is more needed today than ever. To keep its relevance, the OECD needs to strongly stick its funding principles and original goals in an unbiased way. This is what I wish for the organization and for us, the member countries, for the next 60 years.
Excellencies, dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, I am pleased to celebrate with you today the 60th anniversary of the signing of OECD Convention. Moreover, this year also marked the 25th anniversary of the Czech Republic's accession to the OECD. Since then, we have been an active member of the OECD, promoting its core values such as market economy, free trade, plural democracy, and respect to human rights. The world is currently facing unprecedented challenges that will trigger fundamental changes both in our economies and societies. Just as the Marshall Plan managed to overcome the ruins caused by the Second World War, we are now in urgent need of a new recovery plan. This crisis again confirmed how essential it is to act together and take advantage of multilateral approach. With 60 years of experience, the OECD is the best example of how international cooperation can work to the benefit of its members, but also other actors such as non-member countries or other international bodies. That is why I believe that the OECD should take on a key leadership role in the post-pandemic recovery action. We are committed to continue to contribute as much as possible to the OECD's successful and useful work and share our experience, best knowledge and personal qualities. This commitment underpins also the recent nomination of Mr. Vladimir Dlouhý for the post of the OECD's Secretary General. We are convinced that he can offer skills and qualities to OECD needs in the present difficult period. We all should strive for the best for the OECD and our future. We believe that the new leadership can and should build on the best achievements so far. Turning back in time, the OECD can be proud of its achievement, and we have a reason to celebrate today. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, 60th anniversary of the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development falls in a special period for the world economy. The global pandemic, the economic downturn, and the related social challenges create uncertainty, but they also create an opportunity for a new, better, and fairer economic order. Today, after 60 years of existence, it is the OECD that can, and in my opinion, should play a special role in the development of foundations for this new economic order, implementing the organization's slogan, "Better policies for better lives." Ladies and gentlemen, in 2021, Poland will celebrate the 25th anniversary of its membership in the OECD. The last quarter of century has been a period of successful socio-economic changes in my country, changes that were also inspired by experience of OECD countries. We know that we can count on the OECD's support, and the OECD can count on Poland's engagement. Thank you, the OECD. Dziękuję. Happy 60th birthday.
OECD 설립협약 서명 60주년을 축하하며 뜻깊은 행사를 마련해 주신 마크롱 대통령님, 산체스 총리님, 구리아 사무총장님의 리더십에 감사드립니다. 인류 모두가 함께 잘 사는 꿈을 이루기 위해 OECD는 특별하고 소중한 역할을 해왔습니다. 코로나 위기 속에서 인류 공동의 해법을 찾고 있는 지금 OECD 설립 취지를 되새기는 것이 매우 뜻깊습니다. 전쟁의 폐허 위에서 세계 경제를 일으켜 세운 것은 연대와 협력의 정신이었고, OECD 설립 정신 또한 각국의 번영은 모두의 번영에 의존한다는 공존의 정신이었습니다. 이제 OECD는 미주, 유럽, 아시아태평양, 중동 지역의 37개국이 가입한 대표적 경제협력기구가 되었으며 환경, 거버넌스, 금융과 투자, 무역, 반부패 등 450개 이상의 국제 표준을 만들고 실천의 중심이 되었습니다. OECD의 활동으로 세계는 더 공정해지고 투명해졌으며 기업들은 공정한 경쟁 속에서 성장할 수 있었습니다. 한국 역시 OECD가 추구해온 민주주의와 인권, 시장경제와 개방경제라는 보편의 가치를 실천하며 성공 사례를 만들어 왔습니다. 1996년 OECD에 가입한 이래 외국인 투자시장 개방, 자유무역협정 체결로 세계경제와 함께 발전해왔고, 코로나 대응 과정에서도 공존이라는 OECD의 정신을 기반으로 국경과 지역의 봉쇄 없이 방역과 경제활동을 이어갔습니다. 그 결과 수출이 늘고 경제 충격을 최소화했으며 OECD 회원국 중에서도 가장 빠르게 경제를 회복하는 국가가 되고 있습니다. 한국은 앞으로도 OECD가 추진하는 지속 가능한 포용적 성장의 길에 함께 할 것입니다. 고용 안전망과 사회 안전망을 토대로 디지털 뉴딜, 그린 뉴딜, 지역 균형 유지를 추진하고 2050년 탄소 중립을 향해 세계와 함께 할 것입니다. 개발원조위원회의 일원으로서 국제사회의 빈곤 퇴치와 지속가능 발전에도 함께 하겠습니다. 코로나로 인해 세계 경제가 침체된 지금 OECD의 다자주의 정신이 그 어느 때보다 절실합니다. 포용적이고 지속가능한 세계경제 회복을 위한 각국의 협력 의지를 담은 강요 성명 채택을 환영하며 OECD가 세계경제의 더 나은 회복을 위한 이정표가 되어주길 기대합니다. OECD가 지향하는 목표가 높을수록 인류의 미래는 희망적이 될 것입니다. 더 나은 삶을 위한 더 나은 정책을 만들어가는 과정에 한국도 기꺼이 함께하겠습니다. 감사합니다.
The new millennium brought the Slovak Republic into the OECD after a long decade with no new memberships. In 2010, the first of 8 countries to have joined the organization in the last decade became a member, Chile. In this batch, we'll also hear from Slovenia, Israel and Estonia. The last video will come from the President of the European Parliament, who along with EU Presidents Michel and von der Leyen, who we heard from this morning, was keen to add his voice to this conversation. I would also like to add my farewells at this stage. It's been an honor for me as a journalist with Reuters to be hosting this event today and indeed moderating the leaders' panels, all three of them. Let's take a look at this last batch of videos.
Dear President Macron, Prime Minister Sanchez, Secretary General Gurria, I'm glad to be able to join you today to celebrate 60 years of the OECD. OECD has become a symbol of democratic values, a source of inspiration and a driver of evidence-based policy making. This very day, 20 years ago, Slovakia joined this club. Being a member of the OECD has proven be the right choice. We are proud to be a part of an organization which is not only a like-minded club, but also a global library and a think tank for innovative solutions based on evidence, sharing of data and ideas. Membership has opened for us many doors, including those of the NATO and the EU. This year, all our countries have been hit by the global pandemic of COVID-19. This crisis is very different to those which the OECD has been used to face over the past decades. It does not impact only our economies, but lives of our citizens. Slovakia went through the first wave quite successfully. The second one had hit us harder, but we keep on fighting. This is a very simple equation. We won't save economies if we don't save lives. Individual rights and freedoms are also affected. This time